Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, spirits of all ages, welcome to the BlunderSpeaker Show. All right, everybody, welcome back to the BlunderSpeaker Show. Absolute pleasure to have you here. My name is Tepid Goose, as always. This is the show where we talk about Spirit Island, we play Spirit Island, we're absolutely engrossed in Spirit Island, and absolutely everything happens in one take. Yes, indeed, name of the game is Spirit Island, the name of the show is BlunderSpeaker, and there's plenty of blunders to be had. But alas, let's get straight into it. Let's not blunder too much through the intro as I usually do. Today is the Tuesday? Yeah, and to believe today's Tuesday, it's the 11th of March. It is now exactly 10 p.m. Local time. As always, I'm too late getting started with my episode. Thankfully, we don't have a playthrough this evening because our playthrough that went live at the weekend there was almost 4 hours long. So huge thank you to everybody who has been getting involved and watching the playthroughs and giving plenty of really nice feedback. So really nice to know that people are along for the ride and being able to stick with me through the 4 hour playthroughs. That was a really epic one. We'll talk about that later in the show. We are here, of course, today to talk about the Kingdom of Scotland. This is our fourth adversary as part of the Adversary Series. So yeah, we've been rolling this one for a little while. Thank you, of course, to everybody who's here and sticking with me and been here all along the journey, and a huge welcome to everybody who's joining us new and who has stumbled across the episode and stumbled across the show. So, you know, look, massive thank yous for being here. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the notification bell, of course, get that on so that every time one of these drops, it's getting a notification to your phone so that you're ready to go. Sunday evening, 7:30 p.m. local time in Ireland is when the episodes drop. But look, for everybody else, of course, if you're already subscribed, hitting the like button, hitting the share button, hitting the comments, dropping down your inputs on the show, all of it is much appreciated. But that's all about that, and that's all for that today. Let's continue right on and jump right in. We did say, of course, that it's going to be Kingdom of Scotland. I mentioned during my last episode that I rate these about a 9.5 difficulty. Of course, they are rated by as 10 by the creators of the game, and we said this before. I'm a little bit pedantic in terms of how I'm rating all of these adversaries. That's not because I think that 9.5 is anything meaningfully different than 10. That's not the reason that I'm doing it. I'm not talking about precision necessarily here. What I'm talking about, and the reason I'm doing it this way, is so that I can just give an idea about how I see each of the adversaries relative to each other. So of course we started out with France and Sweden, which I reckon are about a 9 par for the easiest of the 8. After that, we went up to Scotland and Brandenburg, Prussia, and now Scotland at a 9.5. And then, as I said, I think the top 4 are all pretty firmly fixed, which we will, of course, get to in later episodes. But we're going to bring up the Spirit panel here. We're going to look at Scotland, and before I do that, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to have a drink. I have a really nice one this evening. Of course, I've got my sparkling water, I think, just in shot at the side there. But I'm mixing it today. Got a very fancy one altogether. This one is terribly posh of me. Lightly sparkling apple and elderflower presse. How about that? Which is, it's non-alcoholic, obviously, but it's mixed with sparkling water, so it's actually quite a nice mix. So got a nice one going for this evening. Got plenty of it over on the side. That's going to keep me going. That's going to keep me hydrated. But enough of that. We're how many minutes? 4.5 minutes now, and I keep saying we're going to start. We are actually going to start. So let's, as I say, bring up the adversary panel here. Top left, that's where we start with all of them. And this is going to be our additional loss condition. So from now on, of course, after Brandenburg, Prussia, all of the remaining adversaries in the list will all have one of these. So this is called Trade Hub. And it says, if the number of coastal lands with cities is ever greater than 2 times the number of boards, the invaders win. okay, let's slow down. We're starting to talk about algebra here. We're starting to talk about 2x and all sorts of things. So what are we actually talking about here? Well, first of all, we can see here coastal lands, and this, as if you don't know Scotland already, and if you do know them, you're going to know that coastal lands is going to be a big theme here. So they're going to ram coastal lands down your neck, and they're going to do it right away as starting out with their lost condition. So what they're checking here is they're going to be checking how many of your coastal lands on your island have cities in them. So that's a key important note to make here. This is checking the number of lands. It is not checking the number of cities. Okay, so it's the number of lands which contain a city, and it doesn't matter how many cities are in that land. It could be 1, it could be 20, not going to make a difference. If the city contains a land, it contributes to this lost condition. So basically, you are going to be allowed to have 2 coastal lands containing cities on average across all of your boards. So what does that mean? If you're playing with one board, you can have 2 of your lands with cities in them. That's it. Simply put. And once you go past that number and you hit the 3rd, you lose the game. Okay, now that's one board. If we go to 2 boards, obviously it's an average, right? So on average, you could, for example, on both boards, you might have 2 lands with cities in them. And then once you go to, so that'd be 4. Once you go past that and you go to the 5th, you lose. Similarly, for 3 boards, it would be 3 times 2. So that will be 6 total lands with cities. And then when you go to the 7th, so it's always going to be 1 more essentially. And that is an average, as I say. So, you know, in some games, you might find that one of your boards gets absolutely overrun and absolutely wrecked, and we'll find out how one of your boards is going to get wrecked now just a moment. But you might have, for example, one board that falls to pieces and all 3 of your coastal lands contain cities. But if you have another board, we're just kind of, you know, improving on the average, and it might have only 1, for example, of its coastal lands has a city, well, then that average is now going to be 2, and you're still safe. So that's basically the gist of that. So 2 times the number of boards, and then as long as you don't go above it, you're good to go. So that's their additional loss condition. We'll talk about that later on, obviously the implications and sort of where that lies in terms of their difficulty and everything else. We'll get into that plenty in the comments and the analysis later. But for now, that's what it is. So up next then we have the escalation, and again all 8 adversaries have these, and the escalation is called Ports Sprawl Outward, and this says on the single board with the most coastal towns or cities, so the most coastal buildings, and the single board here, you're going to add a town to the N lands with the fewest towns, where N is the number of players. So again, we're getting a little bit algebraic as far as our escalation is concerned here. So let's break it down a little bit and look what this actually means. So we're gonna, once we hit this escalation, we're gonna stop before we explore, and we're going to look at the whole island board, and we're going to check which board contains the most coastal towns and cities, and that's going to be our board in question, right? So again, like I said before, when we talk about if one of the boards go to hell, well then that's going to potentially be the one that's in line for the escalation here. And in that, on that single board, we're now going to add towns to the N lands with the fewest towns, where N is the number of players. So again, let's talk about this in terms of reality. What does that actually look like? Let's say I'm playing with one single board, then this board is going to qualify. And on that single board, we are going to now add towns to the N lands where N is 1. So we're essentially adding 1 town to a land with the fewest towns, and you get to choose, of course, because you're the player. You get to break ties, so you get to pick which one of your lands takes a single town. If we're playing with 2 boards, this is going to look like N equals 2, and it's going to say again, pick the one board that's the worst affected on the coast, and now I'm going to add 2 towns onto that island board, and it has to be distributed across the lands with the fewest towns. Let's say I'm playing 6-handed, or 6 players, for example. Well, then now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick one board, and I'm going to add 6 towns onto that same board, the single board, and it has to be to the N lands with the fewest towns. Now, once you start getting up into the higher numbers of boards, you're probably going to start running into situations where you have to add towns onto your island in lands that already contain towns, which is okay. So this can be done. You are required to still add towns, even if, let's say, you only have 2 lands which don't contain towns, that doesn't limit you to 2 town placements here. You're going to have to add it in both of those lands, and then you're going to have to go ahead and add it in 4 other lands on your board that also are the next one up in terms of the lowest number of towns. So you're always kind of checking there what's the fewest, and then if that gets maxed out, then you sort of go to the next one. One thing that you're not allowed to do here is you're not allowed to add into the same land multiple times. So let's say again in that previous example where you had maybe 2 lands that didn't contain a town, you'd go 1, 2, you'd get them in both of them, and then you'd have to pick 4 different lands that are the least amount of towns. You can't then go and add again into one of those. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, look, that's that. That's going to be, as I say, that's where we start to run into this thing I mentioned with Scotland, where one board kind of gets picked on and you might have one board sort of fall to hell. This is a big reason why it happens. And do bear in mind here as well, of course, that that's every escalation. So we're going to have, up to 3. We are going to have exactly 3 escalations. We know that when we're playing against high levels of Scotland, and we'll get to why we know that in a moment. So we're going to have 3 escalations in the game, and potentially they all hammer the same board every single time, especially because if you hit it once, there's a reasonable chance you're now falling apart and you're going to be the one who hits it the following turn. So this can really, really start to compound and really pick on a single board and really hammer a single board, which is really quite different actually than the vast majority of the other sort of adversary rules that we see across the game. So I really, really like the fact that this exists as a mechanic. It's a design space, of course, that they don't use very frequently, but I really like it. And we're going to get into what happened in my game with a certain interaction with this thing when we get to the playthrough later. But look, suffice to say, that's how that works. So after that, then we have, of course, six levels. All of the adversaries have them, and we are going to go from a. Oh, actually, I've just not. Oh yeah. So fear card. Sorry, I was almost confusing myself there. So of course you're going to go at level 0. You're going to go from a 3/3/3, and then all the way up to level 6. Then you're going to go 6/6/4 as far as your stage 1, stage 2, and stage level tier level 1, 2, and 3 cards. Let's say. So that is the highest. So I think I alluded to this in a previous episode here. Scotland are the adversary with the highest number of fear cards, so they stand alone in that, and they actually stand alone by a factor of 2. Not a factor is probably the wrong mathematical term, but they're 2 clear, unless I'm mistaken, of the next place down, which is going to be 14. So Scotland have Scotland have 16, which is 6 + 6, 12 + 4, 16. So they have 16 cards. I'm pretty certain that next place back is only going to be 14. I don't believe there's any that have even 15. So it's 2 clear of second place. I'm gonna have to fact check myself after the fact. I keep doing this where there's like one little thing that I meant to check before I started, but I'm pretty certain that they are 2 clear of I think there's a number of them back in second place. I think Russia, I think Habsburg Livestock, and I think there's maybe at least one other, maybe one more that's back in 14. But anyway, that's the case there. But something also interesting to point out that doesn't get talked about as much, because a lot of people would know that Scotland are the ones, they're Scotland the brave and all that kind of thing. So it's a kind of there's a lore element to them being the bravest. But also as well, something that gets talked about less is how front loaded those fear cards are as well. So not only are they the most overall, but you're going to have the most amount of front loading with this adversary, which is something that stands out as part of their identity as well, and something that's a little bit lesser sort of talked about, as I say, because you've got 6 stage 1, or not stage 1, terror level 1 cards in terror level, 6 cards in terror level 1, which is obnoxiously high. I think Habsburg, again, Livestock have 5, but after that I think that they're all, nearly all 4. Russia I think are 5 as well, but again 6 there, and then 6 again in terror level 2. So that is just brutally difficult. So they stand again, they're 12 cards in just stage 1 and stage 2, which is all of Habsburg's card, or not Habsburg, Brandenburg Prussia, they only get 12 total, whereas Scotland get 12 in the first two levels. So that's super, super difficult. Again, they stand alone in that in terms of 12. I think there's one which is Habsburg back at 11, and then I think there's one more which is Russia back at 10, and then everything else is either 9 or less. So they're really, really strong in those first two levels, and that's going to play a big part in terms of how the games play out when you're actually playing against Scotland too. So anyway, that's that. Enough said about all of that. Let's actually go through and start talking about the levels here. So we've got level 1 is called Trading Port. And we have after setup, and this is really important, this is after setup, in coastal lands, explore cards add a town instead of an explorer. And coastal lands invader card, so the card that says coastal on it, will do this for a maximum of 2 lands per board. So there's a number of things going on here. Let's break them down. First of all, this is after setup, and I'm laughing because I'm in my playthrough that I did against Scotland. I had an incorrect image for the Scotland card, so I had gotten obviously images of all the various assets for the game, and one of the image cards must have been an outdated image or something that I got access to. And it said during play in coastal lands. So when I played my game the other day, the one that went live on the channel, I actually opened with the opening explorer using this effect. So I made the game harder for myself. I kind of joked, I think, in the caption, I said that I played against Scotland 6+. So you're not supposed to do this. This is a bit like France. If you remember back when we analysed France on their opening explorer, they also don't do this sort of bad effect. They don't do it on the opening explorer. They explore with only a single explorer as part of the opening explorer. And here with Scotland, the opening explorer should also only explore as regular, quote unquote regular, where you just do a single explorer. But every time after that, when they explore into coastal lands, they're going to explore with a town instead of an explorer. So super, super tough. We talked about coastal being a theme for Scotland, and here it is right up front in the and they're level 1. This is a big part of the theme of the coastal thing. So that's going to hit you really hard. Just do bear in mind here that with coastal lands itself, that the land that says coastal on it, it won't do it for all 3 lands. So you get to pick which of the 2. And there's a number of things at play here. So for example, if you would skip or prevent the explorer somehow with a wilds token or an isolation or something like that, you will then be forced to put towns into the other lands. So just that's a little tricky one just to keep an eye on there. So you can't kind of nominate the one that got skipped to be one of the town lands. It doesn't work like that. So if you skip one, if you do successfully explore in 2 more, they both have to take the town. That's something to bear in mind. And the other thing as well that's worth pointing out here too is that this doesn't count for stage 3 cards. So for example, if you have board D, stage 3 has it can potentially hit, for example, I think it's jungles, wetlands are the 3 lands that they have across. They've obviously got the double wetland on the coast plus a jungle. If you hit the jungle wetland card, you would have to actually explore with a town into all 3 lands. So that's something just to bear in mind. Another way that this can come up is actually with the same spirit I played in the playthrough the other day, which is deeps. And if you start doing things like encroaching on the land and sinking lands and creating additional coastal lands, that can also come up where you have to actually explore with towns into every single stage 3 land on the coast. So that's something to bear in mind there. So next, moving on then, is going to be level 2. This is called Seize Opportunity, and this is during setup you're going to add a city to land number 2. Okay, doesn't that already contain a city? Fair enough. We're going to go ahead and we're going to stick another city in there alongside it, which is, yeah, it's pretty tall town there, a pretty tall looking region of the map there. So that's pretty tough. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to place the coastal lands card as the 3rd stage 2 card. So now we're going to take what's usually randomized. Usually we don't know against every other adversary, or almost every other adversary. In fact, there's one other where Coastal comes into play, but it's not for today. So against almost every other adversary, you randomize your stage 2s, and you don't know whether you're actually going to get Coastal or not, because of course it could get discarded as part of your sort of setting up the invader deck. But this time around against Scotland, we're going to actually take that card, put it to the side. We're going to prepare the sort of stage 2s, let's say, and then we're going to take the coastal lands and we're going to put it in as the third stage 2 card. So usually we have 4 stage 2s, 4 random stage 2s, but in this case it's going to be kind of 2, 2, coastal 2. So you're going to know where it goes. And then the next thing that you're going to do as part of this level is you're going to move those first 2 stage 2s that I just talked about. You're going to move them up by 1. So what does that mean? I always found that a slightly sort of confusing way to kind of word it, but it's a little bit easier when you actually just read the deck order on the screen. And it basically looks like this. It's going to be 1, 1. Then you're going straight into your 2s here. So usually you'd have 3 1s. Now you've only got 2. So it's 1, 1. Then it's 2, 2, 1. So that's where those 2s kind of slid up. Then you go 2, 2, 1. Then you go coastal 2, and then into your stage 3s. So that's 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, coastal 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. It's a lot easier to read it than it is probably with me saying that out loud. So I'm not sure how well that's going in for those in the listening to on the podcast and audio medium. But hopefully that's clear enough. So that's basically the setup for them. So yeah, look, getting an extra city into land 2, massive part of the identity of Scotland. Everybody, if you know Scotland, knows and loves and hates that extra city in stage 2, and we will talk about that plenty as the episode goes on. So next up then we have chart the coastline. This says, in coastal lands, build cards affect lands without invaders, so long as there is an adjacent city. Okay, so now we're starting to talk about adjacencies, and we're talking about coastal land. So what does this say? This basically says that whenever you're about to build in a coastal land for build cards affect lands without invaders. Okay, actually, now that I'm reading that out loud, I'm wondering whether that works for additional builds. I'm wondering around the wording on that, because usually that would say build actions, for example, as opposed to build cards. So I wish I had checked this before now. And again, I wonder whether this is something related to the wording on the actual panel itself. Do I have access to my Scotland panel here that I might be able to check this while I'm live? What does it say here? Yeah, it says build cards. Okay, on my own panel here, it says build cards as well. So that's an interesting one to know. I'm going to put an overlay on this. So for those watching on the video, they'll be able to get the answer. For those of you listening through on the podcast, unfortunately, I won't have it for you. But in essence, anyway, what does this mean? It means when I'm doing a build in a coastal land, if the land is empty, I'm still going to build in there so long as there's an adjacent city. So let's say, for example, in the previous level, or the level 1, they go and explore and they place a town. Before they build in there, I remove that town through whatever means, and it's now an empty land. Now when it goes ahead and builds in there, I'm going to scan every adjacent land to that land, and the adjacent lands can be any lands. They don't have to be coastal. That's a tricky one to watch out for here. That's an important distinction to make. Any adjacent land, whether it's inland or coastal, if there's an adjacent city, then I will still build in the land. So tricky, very tricky, trickier than it looks, and you don't really hear this get talked about very much in terms of what Scotland's identity is. This one doesn't really come up, but it is hard, it is tough, and especially because that we saw on the previous level, which puts 2 cities there into land number 2, they're usually pretty tricky to get rid of, and as a result then, if they sit there on the map for a long time in the game, they're going to be adjacent to, of course, the two coastal lands beside it, so it becomes very difficult to kind of, stop, cut them off at the source, essentially, and stop them building, and then thus stop them ravaging. So the one thing I was saying there previously in terms of when it's the wording around that build cards, I'm just wondering whether or not an extra build, sometimes an event or something like that might cause an additional build. that's not necessarily related to a build card. It might just say, for example, after advancing invader cards, build in one land or something like that. So in that case, that's maybe not necessarily the regular build action or build step or something like that. So just wondering whether or not there's a little rules interaction there that I wish again I had looked up beforehand, and I never really stopped to focus on the wording. But now that I have, I'm going to go ahead and check after the fact, and I hope I remember to overlay the actual answer up on the screen right now. So that's that one. Anyway, next up is going to be Ambition of a Minor Nation. This is level 4, and this is going to say, during setup, replace the bottom stage 1 card with the bottom stage 3 card. So again, all sounds a little bit fussy, and you're kind of thinking which is the bottom stage 1 card or whatever. Again, it's a little bit easier when you see it written down. So before we did this thing where we sort of moved this 2 stage 2 cards up by 1, and then that sort of pushed one of the stage 1s kind of later in the deck. Now essentially that stage 1 gets removed and it gets replaced with a stage 3 card. So what does it look like now? You've got a deck that reads 1/1, 2/2, 3, coastal, 2, 3-3-3-3. So you've got that sort of slightly Brandenburg-Prussia-esque kind of thing going on here, where they take one of the stage 3s and they throw it up near the front of the deck here. And again, super tough. We talked again with BP about how bringing the 3s up and sort of dropping them in the middle with 2s creates this sort of propensity for a runner type stuff, and getting the kind of the back-to-back lands, and it's the exact same situation here, and we'll pick up on that a little bit later in the episode. So this is really tough. So that's Ambition of a Minor Nation. Next up is level 5, Runoff and Bilgewater. I love the name of that. It sounds so Bilgewater. It sounds so dirty and disgusting, and don't really know what the word actually means, but Runoff and Bilgewater sounds filthy and really not something that you're going to enjoy. So this one says, after a Ravage action adds a Blight to a coastal land, add and Blight to that board's ocean, and then in brackets, without cascading. Treat the ocean as a coastal wetland for this rule and for blight removal / movement. Okay, so what is this? So this basically says, again, if you're going to ravage in a coastal land, so again, you've got that theme, it's all happening on the coast. If you ravage in a coastal land now, you're now not only going to add your blight for blighting the land, it says after a ravage action adds blight. So of course, this doesn't happen on every ravage. This only happens if you actually add a blight in the first place. So if a blight gets through from your ravages is a better way to put this, then you're going to also add an additional blight into the ocean on that board. So you've got a little bit of an oceans in play type of thing happening here, which is a little bit similar to the mechanic that we see from Ocean's Hungry Grasp, where now the ocean tile or land, or however you want to describe it, on your island board now counts for something, and now actually it's in play somehow. And it's going to start accumulating blight. And it's going to be a horrible runoff, Bilgewater-y type place, because it's going to be potentially full of blight, because they're full of, your coastal lands are full of buildings, and they're ravaging there all the time. And it's also, it's all sorts of awful. So thankfully, this doesn't cascade, is the one thing here. So at least every time you ravage in your coastal lands, when you get that additional trigger of putting the blight into the sea, it doesn't matter how many's already in there, it's not going to cascade again. And I think I heard somewhere that apparently the original iteration of Scotland, it did cascade, which I don't really know how that could work, because you're cascading, you go into the ocean and then it goes back out onto the thing, and you cascade back into the coast. And I imagine the levels of blight cascades were just out of control with that stuff. So that sounds appalling, and I'm very glad that's not the case anymore. But this is, it's actually, I really like this rule. It's very reminiscent of Sweden, of course, because Sweden have this kind of double blight mechanic, and Scotland gives you a flavour of that, but it's a thematic flavour, and it gives you something a little bit different. They're not double blighting all the time, it's only on the coast, it's thematic, and it's very Bilgewatery, and I really do like it, and it gives you this element of, it's just another way for them to turn the screw. And again, we're going to talk about how Scotland kind of have fingers in every pie type of thing. They're attacking you and they're getting at you in all sorts of different ways, and it becomes very difficult to ignore all of those ways. You know, there's sort of all sorts of ways that they can get at you, and this is just yet another one that makes you know, sometimes blight removal can be a good tactic if they're just hammering you really hard in a certain land. You just go, okay, take the whole hit, remove the blight, and move on. But now against Scotland, that they make that quite a bit more tough because, of course, the double blight. So really like this. And like it quite a bit more than, for example, France 5, where they have a blight sort of thing which shuts down blight removal, but in a bit more of an obnoxious way that there's no real interplay to it all that much with France, but there is with Scotland, because blight removal is still okay to offset this. So anyway, that's it. Getting on to final level 6 here. So everything up until this point has been coast, right? Coast. Hammer you on the coast, bilge water you on the coast, you know, chart your coastline, trading ports, all that kind of stuff. Now all of a sudden we've got level 6, and it's called Exports Fuel Inward Growth. After the Ravage step, add a town to each inland land that matches a Ravage card and is within range 1 of a town or a city. So, okay, there we go. All of a sudden it's like, wait, whoa, what? Weren't you just, you know, doing everything on the coast? Well, what's happening here? And this is a slightly jarring kind of almost add-on to the end of the card. It's a bit out of theme, and it's a bit out of flavour with everything else that's happening with Scotland right now. Now all of a sudden they're going, okay, cool, yeah, no, we hammered you for five levels on the coast. Now we're just going to, you know, sort of fuel the inward growth a bit. And now after each Ravage step, we're going to check the card that just ravaged, and we're going to add a town in every inland land that matches the Ravage card and is within range 1 of a building. So let's say it's just a regular mountain, for example, a stage 1 mountain or something like that. We ravage in mountains, and there's maybe one coastal mountain and one inland mountain. Then after we ravage, so before we build, we're going to go ahead and we're going to check, and we see, yep, there's one inland mountain in there, and yep, it's next door to a city. I'm going to place a town in there. That's it. Add. That's the keyword, add. You can't stop it. So pretty tricky. But if that was a stage 3 card and you've got 3 such inland lands, for example, you're going to go ahead and you're going to add 3 towns from that. So that's super, super, super tough. And it really, it makes you focus on a whole other aspect of the game, because up until now, everything's been like, yeah, just protect my coast, focus all my energy on my coast, and we're good to go. Now you've got this level 6 comes in, and it goes, no chance. We're going to hammer you on your inland as well, so you better be paying attention to that too. And I really do like that. I really do like, and I said before about Scotland being sort of, well-rounded, and they've kind of fingers in every pie. Yeah, they've got their fingers on the coastal pie, and they've got their fingers well involved in that inland pie as well. So you better not be paying no attention to that inland, or you will get hammered by this Scotland 6 rule. So that's basically all of that. We're 32 minutes in. That's unlike me to spend half an hour talking through the adversary panel. But that's been all of that. We got into it. We got really into it there. But I really do like this adversary. I don't think I've mentioned that so far in the episode yet. I love playing against Scotland. These were originally my sort of first favourite adversary, so to speak. They're not my actual favourite anymore. They're second place. But I really do like them. They're in second place for a reason, because they're a huge amount of fun to play. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to get to as far as the comments here, which talk through a lot of what's sort of good about them and why they're fun and why they're good and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that now. So that's the adversary panel. We're going to jump into the community interaction, the community inputs, and all your comments and everything else in here. And again, as always, massive thank you to everybody who's been involved. Massive thank you to everybody who's been, even just likes and shares and all that kind of stuff. As far as the engagement here goes, it's really encouraging to see so many people getting involved in the conversation here. And of course, as before, same story applies here. So much of what I would have said and what I wanted to talk about and sort of my own thoughts and everything else came shining through in everything that you guys were saying. So I really enjoy that aspect of this. And again, we're going to focus a huge amount of our discussion around what Scotland do and how to battle them into these comments. So bear with me just a second. Have a breath. Have some sparkling elderflower presse. And let's continue on. So we're going to start right off. We're going to start off with our friend Maggie here. Set to read Maggie 1, 2, 3. And Maggie says, it's my favourite adversary alongside HME, which is one we haven't covered yet, of course. So it's one of the most balanced adversaries. So here we are right up front, most balanced. Keywords here. A lot of people repeat this. A lot of people said this. It doesn't hurt or encourage any specific strategy. It manages to stay similar to the base game in terms of the overall game plan and feel very different at the same time. And I love that. That's a really nice way to sort of start us off here and say that it's very similar in terms of an overall game plan of how you play a game, but it does feel very different and it feels very thematic, and they've got their own kind of flavour and texture involved in there, but you're still doing a lot of your kind of same basic stuff that you do in a regular game of Spirit Island. So thanks, Maggie. I hope you don't mind me calling you Maggie, because I just cannot pronounce that name. If you want to come in the comments, Maggie, I'd be more than happy for you to actually explain how you put together those collection of consonants and what it actually means. But for now, let's continue. So we've got at CFL Lightbulb. So they've had a lightbulb moment here. I find them the most balanced overall. So again, they're coming in with balance. Hard, but they don't have a crazy amount of extra things to keep track of and don't invalidate strategies just by existing. So Ocean gets hit harder with the Ocean Blight, but otherwise I'd say most spirits are fine into Scotland. So they pick up on an interesting point here. We sort of hinted at it before when I mentioned Ocean's Hungry Grasp, but here is very sort of clearly the interaction that comes up between the two. So if you blight with Scotland and you do that, if you blight on the coast and you have to put that extra blight into the ocean, if Ocean's Hungry Grasp is in that ocean, they will lose a presence. So that's something to keep an eye out for, and something which of course I had to keep an eye out for because I play it as Ocean's Hungry Grasp in my playthrough. But again, we'll talk about that later on. So I really like this again from Lightbulb here. They're just saying that they don't invalidate strategies just by existing, which is quite nice. So up next then is Symphony 7, and Symphony says, Scotland is easily my favourite adversary of the bunch. So their rules are cohesive and relatively low on rules overhead, and they are interesting and challenging without invalidating any spirits like high level England does. So there's a good example. They're repeating a little bit what Lightbulb was saying before, but they're now saying that they're kind of more concretely talking about England as an example of something that does invalidate spirits. So they have built-in rules to keep them from getting easily cheesed by any particular strategy. They just ask you to play good Spirit Island. I love that. So I absolutely love their escalation because it highly rewards the entire team coordinating from turn one, making a plan and following through and getting off of their starting boards right from the jump. Fantastic. Love this here. Talking about the team coordination, there's a couple of other commenters pick up on this as well. So of course, because you're hammering one particular board, everybody knows that right from the beginning of the game. So if you're playing a spirit like, I don't know, maybe Fractured Days or something like that, which doesn't really, or at least often doesn't do much on their board tile, maybe they find a Days card, but that's beside the point. But a lot of games, Fractured kind of just sits there and it sort of maybe skips a couple of things, but doesn't really interact too much with its plastic. That's probably the board that's getting hammered. So you're gonna know that, and you're gonna be in this game and you're gonna go, right, let's think about how we actually handle this situation and come together as a team, which I love. Anyway, I digress. Rest of the comment here. I also really like throwing Scotland into a combined adversary pairing. So here's somebody talking about a combo and saying even at lower levels, rather than trying to push 6/6, they add some nice coastal spice without adding a ton of extra rules to track. Absolutely wonderful adversary and absolutely wonderful comment from you, Symphony 7. Thank you very much indeed. Up next then we have at Damuel. So relatively I love this. Relatively, they're easy. Relatively meaning that we got one very important rule wrong for a long time. We played with their alternate victory condition being ex-coastal cities, not ex-coastal lands with cities, and we still beat it on level 6. Now, feels too easy. Yeah, I'll believe that. It feels too easy now. That is way harder. So you remember at the start when I talked about it counts the number of lands. Now they're not counting the number of lands. They just counted the number of cities. And if you remember, the game starts with 2 cities on the coast. So if they build a single extra city on the coast from the starting situation, they lost. So clearly that's extremely difficult and massively limits how much play and interplay you have with Scotland. So I laughed at that one for sure. Okay, so up next then we have, whoa, it's Preston. Whoa. Yeah. Jesus. Oh God, doing these things live in one take is really something. I didn't plan to do that. I wish I hadn't. Anyway, definitely on the easier side of the adversaries, not basic at all, although I do think that they're the most fair. Okay. So Scotland has a few very interesting dynamics. They're one of the adversaries where it's most reasonable to win on terror level 2, since their building and exploring is so fair relative to what others do. Okay. They also don't scale very well comparing to many other adversaries. So if you manage to kill the double cities in the early game through defense and the hand movement, for example, they will fall behind very fast. And they say Scotland's entire game revolves around the 3 to coastal turn. If you remember correctly, the deck is 1-1, 2-2, 3 coastal. So that's that 3 into coastal turn they're talking about here. And how well the stage 3 ravage to coastal builds to coastal ravage goes will determine the entire game. So they say it's extremely important to proactively control the coasts, and it is not worth making pockets or playing greedy to scale if you are losing control of your coasts. If you survive that 3-2 turn in reasonable shape, or the 3 to coastal turn in reasonable shape, you will almost certainly win the game. So, whoa, it's Preston coming in with the big brain, the big brain hot takes here. So, first of all, Preston, absolutely strongly, massively strongly agree with how you end there in terms of the 3 to the coastal is the entire game. I strongly agree with that. Do they scale very well compared to many other adversaries? I think I disagree with you here a little bit on this one. They also don't scale very well compared to many other adversaries. I think I disagree with that a bit. I think Scotland scale fairly well towards the end game. Now, they're not England, fair enough, but they pack a few punches in here, and I think on the previous episode we talked about the rubber banding or the bounce back ability from a previous thing, and you know that Scotland 6 that really gives them legs. It really does, and especially if we talk about back to backs, you can go from a pretty well stable looking board against Scotland, and if they hit that back to back a couple times and you get that Scotland 6 into the back-to-back, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they can really start to pile plastic back onto the board again. So I think they scale fairly well. I think the games against Scotland generally tend to go pretty long. They put a lot of plastic on the board. Now, it's manageable, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with this idea of, especially here, the other thing I wanted to pick up on here that I think I disagree with a bit is they're one of the adversaries where it's most reasonable to win on terror level 2, since their building and exploring is so fair relative to what others do. So reminding ourselves here, a terror level 2 win is removing all buildings from the map, which is tough to do against Scotland. Now, one thing going in your favour for getting a terror level 2 here win is it takes you so long to get to terror level 3. So there's so many cards for you to get through until you reach terror level 3 that, you know, there's a reasonable comment in here about, you know, you're more likely to get everything gone before you hit the 13th card, so to speak. So I think that's fair. But I think this idea of, you know, their building and exploring is so fair relative to others, I'm not so sure I agree with that. And, you know, again, I'm not doing this to be difficult, Preston, and if you're listening here, I hope you are. You know, I love that you put the comment in, and I'll happily agree with comments or disagree with comments in the name of good conversation. And this is exactly why I get people to provide comments here, is that we can have this element of, well, actually, yes, actually, no, why does that matter? Why doesn't it? Or why does that work? Why doesn't it? So you know, I remember there was one episode of the Kindred Spirit podcast where one of the commenters commented in that they said they didn't like how the KSP hosts always agreed all the time. They were too agreeable. And John responds with well, actually, the thing you've just put in here about I think it was actually Scotland, if I remember correctly, is like, you saying that Scotland, that Ocean is good against Scotland. I disagree with you, so I didn't plan on putting that in here, but I just remembered that on the spot, and I also just remembered, I think it's the Scotland episode. So anyway, all of that aside, you know, Preston, again, really appreciate the inputs here. Do disagree with you a little bit here, but again, for in the name of good conversation. So up next then we have RS Mitch. And they say, except level 6, I find them to be the easiest rule set to remember and internalize. So a few people have picked up on that being sort of an easy rule set. And they say a good challenge across most spirits, though if you can hit really hard out of the gate, you can overwhelm Scotland to where they can't recover. So here, I put this up, Mitch's comment up with Preston's comment, so that obviously Preston gets a little bit of backing from another poster here, because here's another person who's saying that if you can hit them really hard early, they don't really have that kind of staying power and they can't really recover later in the game. So again, you know, just because I disagree with Preston doesn't mean that I'm right. This is obviously a very sort of impartial sort of opinion on these things, and certainly I'll never sit here and tell you that my opinion is always right. It's an opinion, that's just what it is, and it's based on my own experiences in the game. But you know, again, I think there's a part of this again I wanted to pick up on here, because if you can hit really hard out of the gate is maybe an important qualifier here to make, and this idea of getting in really early against Scotland and hurting them early so that it hurts their ability to recover. I don't disagree with that, right? I don't disagree with if you can get there early, and in particular here I'm talking about land 2. So I'll be very explicit with what I think here. If you can get into that land 2 and clear the 2 cities out of land 2 early, I do think that makes a massive impact on Scotland's difficulty overall. Okay, so from that perspective, with what Preston is saying and also with Mitch here, I do agree with that. I just think that's a very difficult thing to do, right? So I think there's not very many spirits who are who have the capability to really go and hurt that land 2 early. Now, you can do it with defend and Dahan, and we'll talk about defend later and why that's so important. That's a much easier way to go about it for a lot of spirits. I think it's a more accessible way for a lot of spirits to be able to go ahead and do that. But even still, you'd have to get 3 Dahan in there. You have to be able to defend for, you know, 6. So again, it's not just a kind of a foregone conclusion, right? That's a challenging thing to be able to do. But if you can do it, I do strongly agree that yes, it does hurt their ability to recover and makes your game significantly easier overall. Anyway, moving on here, we've got Gooseman as a gamer, so welcome back, Gooseman. We have Scotland is my favourite adversary to play against, so some decent difficulty, a fair loss condition, and overall some staying powers. This is why I put this one in here. Goose is backing me and saying that they have staying power with the ability to build in empty lands without going whole hog England on us. So yeah, they mentioned about the ability to build in empty lands. So there's another way in which Scotland kind of can rebound a little bit, right? You can't just kind of tempo them out and clear the land and sort of go about it that way. A lot of times they're going to keep building on you, even if you've done that. So they have some sort of redundancy and bounce back ability built in there. They feel a little bit like a cross between England, which is building in empty lands, BP, which is accelerating the invader deck, and Sweden, which is adding extra blight. So just enough of each to hurt, but not so much as to be totally annoying. So absolutely strongly agree here, Gooseman, and they put in a funny little note here with saying, however, since I almost never play more than 2 players, I never noticed how ridiculous that escalation is for high player counts. So I guess that could add 8 towns to a clean board. They say, I wonder how they decide who the poor sap is that gets punished in the 72-player game. So I laughed at this. You know, if you didn't see it recently, the people over on Discord set up one of these massive big play-by-play, or play-by-post, should I say, games, 72-player, where they get 72 people in, and you know, they set up this play-by-post thing, which is cool. I never did it, but it's a super cool idea where you kind of, I guess, you can take your turn away for a day or a few days or something, I'm not sure, and you can kind of think about it, and then you come back and you post in somewhere on what you're doing to the board. So I guess you've got a big map, and you can kind of look at the map, a digital map obviously, and things like that, and you know, you've got a whole bunch of people playing and all interacting across the board. I think it's like what is it, like 12, not 12, what would that be, 9 8-player boards, something like that, or 8 island tile boards, 9 of them, archipelagos, so to speak, around the thing. So anyway, there's no point in getting into that now, but that's one of those things where it's like 72-player game, and he was just laughing here, saying, Gooseman, saying, you know, the escalation in theory would add 72 towns on one board, so that would be pretty funny, but I don't think that's how they do it. I never actually looked it up. If anybody wants to drop in the comments and let me know exactly how they go about managing the escalation when you do those big, ridiculous 72-player games, I'd be happy to hear. So next up we have then Rusto, TFG. And Rusto says, it's my favourite adversary. So a lot of people really enjoying Scotland and finding it their favourite adversary here. So feels like a more balanced England to me. Absolutely. Still very durable, but doesn't get insanely messy, and you can eventually start cleaning up a couple of lands. So also knowing when Coastal Explore happens removes some of the RNG. The only slightly annoying thing is how long it takes to reach Terror level 2. Yeah, those 6 cards are absolutely brutal in Terror level 1. But yeah, I really like this. Here's the first mention of knowing about that Coastal Explore, the Coastal card, and sort of removing the RNG and giving you sort of some agency on sort of how and when you kind of turn your attention maybe to some of those coastal lands, because you know it's coming, you know exactly when it's coming, and having that that knowledge in the game can be very powerful depending on the texture of the game. So up next then is River Paw. So I'm not as experienced as some commenters on here, but my buddy and I set out on a quest to defeat each level 6 adversary as a duo without ever reusing a spirit. So awesome challenge, really nice, River Paw, and you're going to give us some inputs on one game here, but I'd be more than happy to hear about more of these as we go along, so please do keep us in the loop on that one. So they say, we played Tangle, Spread of Rampant Green, and Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds into Scotland, and it was a blast. So I, as Tangles, used my damage abilities to nuke the 2 coastal cities by turn 3. Whoa. That's pretty savage. And then I just covered my coast in wilds. Yeah, that sounds super cool. Super cool. My buddy as keeper did keeper things, and we had one of our easiest level 6 victories. That's amazing. They say, definitely recommend trying Tangles into Scotland, so you use your innate and your special rule to buy time inland while you focus your damage on the coast, and then just wilds it up and watch them crumble. So Tangles and Keeper, never thought of that combo before. I'm not sure why, because it should be obvious because they're the 2 wild spirits, but that's amazing. And I could see that being a super nice game, and a really nice combination. Wilds are one of them things that I find they're kind of the overlooked a little bit token in the game. You don't really see that much of them. Keeper is kind of like a wild spirit, but a lot of the time it's just a major spirit sort of thing. So you know, I think bringing in the Tangles in there and getting the sort of combos with them sounds amazing. And just a quick comment here, River Paw, and to everybody, in terms of I'm not as experienced as most commenters on here. Please absolutely never, if you're listening to this, if this is reaching your ears and you've maybe thought to yourself, hey, I'd like to get involved here in the conversation, but you know, I don't play level 6s, or I don't play 6/6s, or whatever, it absolutely does not matter. And I really hope, you know, that it's my intention to really foster a community engagement, a space for that here, where everybody and anybody feels welcome and encouraged to bring their little slice of what they feel in the game, because everybody has it, and it doesn't matter what level you're playing. You know, obviously River Pie, you're playing level 6s here, and that's the top level. So when you're talking about his experience, you know, there's not much above that in terms of, you know, the raw difficulty in this game. So, but it doesn't matter if it's level 6 or level 1. You know, obviously when I do these breakdowns, I'm breaking down the level 6 adversary, and a lot of my comments here will go towards playing an adversary at its maximum level, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way to play, and it certainly doesn't mean it's better than any other way to play. It's not more valid, it's not more relevant than somebody coming in. And again, like I said, if you're listening to this and you felt that you'd like to get involved before, but you felt a bit what's the word here, you know, discouraged or at least a bit nervous or something like that, because I have heard that before, especially in the Reddits, with people saying, oh, I wasn't sure, I'm not maybe as experienced as others, and I'm not sure whether my thing is the right thing to say. Get in there and say it. And I'm really, really strongly encouraging everybody, get in here and say it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'd love to hear about epic wins that you had, even if it's at level 1. If that's your epic win, I'm absolutely delighted, and I'd love to hear it. I really want to get those stories in here. So massive thank you, River Paul, and we shall continue. So we have table 61 here. Tables with 4 points. Tables always likes to come in, I've seen in the past, with a decent breakdown and a strong sort of thoughts, sort of well crafted in terms of a breakdown here. So let's see what they say. So they're on the easier side of adversaries overall at level 6, though not massively. I think they're about on par with Sweden 6 and BP 6, harder than France 6, and easier than HME 6 and HLC 6, and they're the two Habsburgs. If those acronyms there are going over people's heads because I'm speaking too fast. So Scotland are basically easier than HME, which is Habsburg Mining Expedition, and Habsburg Livestock, but they're kind of either on par or easier than sort of the others below. They say the rules create pressure and give you clear ways you can lose, but also allow many options for counterplay. That's point 1. Point 2 is they're relatively easy to understand, especially up to level 5. So levels 2 and 4 are just setup changes. Levels 1, 3, and 5 are all a modification to essentially a basic action, adversary action or invader action, and it's essentially just do this action a bit better on the coast, which again we talked about before. Complexity wise, I'd say Scotland is about on par with Sweden and England. So we're talking about complexity this time. They're about on par with Sweden and England, those making up the quote-unquote moderate complexity adversaries. And they say here BP is the one low complexity adversary, Habsburg Livestock, France, and Russia are the high complexity, and then HME are the very high. So that's an interesting point. I've never actually really seen it worded like that before, with the adversary sort of linked in the same kind of spirit complexity sort of paradigm that we know very well. And then their third point here is that they're really cool and unique invader deck. So in terms of, you know, simply deck modification, it's the second toughest besides BP, I'd say. I'm not so sure. I think Russia would like to have something to say here, but that's for another day. And they quickly bring in escalations and a somewhat early stage 3 card, with the coastal card being nasty and also carefully placed. So the pacing is really fun though, they say, and I'd say aside from smashing the coast, their unique invader deck is the second most iconic thing about Scotland. Point 4. Well, maybe the second most iconic thing is their escalation. I really like how this one encourages players to move in and support specific boards. So again, this is talking about the escalation. So not just to have players sit on a single board forever. So it gets really fun, I find, in larger games. Having a board get dunked on with 12 towns over 2 turns really needs people to work together. And their own boards are taking less pressure, so go and support the board that needs it more. And finally, Tables closes out with, overall, Scotland is my favourite adversary. The only weakness I feel is this level 6 rule. I don't mind that it adds something to support the inland, but I dislike the quote-unquote after ravage placement of this rule, since it now means there are 4 separate steps get modified by Scotland. And that's one thing that I don't think anybody else pointed out. You've got these little things, I've talked about them a few times, and I really, really love them. The little reminder tokens that you put off to the bottom of the invader sort of banker board area thing. And there's 4 of them, so I'm pretty sure they're the only adversary that has 4. So there's a lot to kind of track. Now, rules overhead wise, you've heard a lot of people say they're not that complex in terms of rule overhead, but they are actually the only one who has 4 of those little reminders. So yeah, that's just something to note there. But look, thanks very much, Tables. Much appreciate the in-depth analysis as always. Up next is a drink of my fine sparkling stuff, and then we have at Nora Adrenaline's coming back in. My scattered thoughts on these hooligans. So Scotland is a well-rounded adversary which adds difficulty without pushing the game too far in one direction or another. So I especially like using them when I'm playing a new spirit for the first time. So we heard that a lot about BP last time. Brandenburg Prussia, there was a lot of people saying they like to use them for a new spirit. But here's Nora saying they like a Scotland game for a new spirit. So their escalation encourages spirits to spread to other boards and help out, which we just heard from Tables, which I think is a nice design choice. And if spirits aren't willing / able to do that, then the mechanic might feel a bit abusive, I guess. Absolutely agree there. And the fact that you know for sure when coastal is going to come up is neat, because it lets you plan in a little more detail than you normally can. So yeah, that's another point that someone else picked up on, is this kind of known info card. And again, if you're playing with the physical copy, I'm showing this up to the screen now for those that can't see. When you put your coastal lands in the deck, please put it face up so that you can see it right there on the deck in front of you. Don't put that face down. It's known information. Like I said before with the slave rebellion with France, put it face up in the deck. If you've got the coastal lands against Scotland, put that face up in the deck, because you know where it is. You don't need to have the extra mental load of trying to remember where it is when that's known information. So that is all on that one. Up next then we've got Versalius here, so I think we've got a few more. We've got Versalius saying that they're the ultimate punching bag. It's fun because they throw so much plastic at you and you get to knock it down, and they've got a very predictable set of abilities, so that greatly rewards planning ahead. So again, that's expanding on the previous point about the known info on the coastal lands. They say that they extend that beyond just that. They say that they've got overall a predictable set of suite of abilities, and you're very much rewarded for planning ahead, which I strongly agree with Scotland. It also has lots of fun interactions with doubles, so it's probably the most fair adversary in doubles overall, which I'm in pretty strong agreement with. I would say it and France are the two. I think they're the two that are probably the most fair. Overall, are they the most easiest? Yes, I think they're probably the 2 easiest as well. After that, it starts to get pretty steeply difficult beyond that, but again, that is for another day. Here we have Key Adeptness then 4 coming in and saying, I view it as the quote-unquote default adversary, in the sense that it doesn't overly punish any specific thing, so most spirits will have a decent time against it. Again, when I was playing spirits for the first time, I tended to play against Scotland to try to avoid any particularly strong or weak matchups. And I enjoy that it tends to discourage staying on your own board. Again, they're picking up on that, but they're saying that some spirits cannot solve the land too early on, and I'd extend that beyond some. I'd say most spirits cannot solve the land too early on, and other spirits can solve them easily. So to maximize efficiency, you want to identify the best lands for each spirit to solve. So yeah, that's going beyond now the escalation. They're talking about, for example, when you explore, even before your stage 2 cards, if you explore on a few island tiles and you hit some of your island tiles hit the level 2, the land 2. If you're one of those spirits that's going to struggle with a land 2, then everybody else on your team should be thinking about getting over and potentially helping you with that land 2. And I'll pick up a little bit on that when I talk about my playthrough a little bit later on. And then they say also bonus points because in my correct opinion, using Shadow's the hand cards to wipe out the double city is the most satisfying turn 1 and 2 strategy in the game. And again, we talked about this Shadow's little combo that they have in their hand, which is the favors call do and I talked about it before. I can't remember. I'll bring it up on the screen if I remember for those watching at home. But it's that one where you gather in the Dahan, and then the other one is where you prevent Dahan from dying and get the counter attack that way. So you'd take the Ravage in this case on the land too. You'd take the Blight. You'd put a Blight into the ocean, but you would get to wipe out the cities. And I do agree that does sound like a lot of fun and a pretty effective use of that little mini combo. So, okay, continuing on then, we've got Tiny. Okay, yeah, I just noticed that now. Ty-knee. A friend and I tried Scotland for the first time last week as they had just bought Feather and Flame. We were playing as Ocean and Volcano and managed to start off quite easy as both our land 2s did not come up right from the start. After a few rounds, things were looking scary, where I as Volcano was forced to play mostly from an inland mountain on 2 boards even, because the coastal mountains didn't come up at all until the stage 3 card. And I was starting to wish I had placed some presence in the E2 over on the coast instead, so that my eruptions were at least killing the initial cities in the origin land. Although I think that the inland in that case would have suffered too much if I did that. At that point, the Ocean player drafted Flow Like Water, Reach Like Air, and the game was pretty much won on the spot, with Ocean cleaning up all the coastal cities while I was able to clean the inland dump lands with forests of living obsidian and some eruptions. So all in all, felt like a pretty decent adversary that doesn't do anything that feels particularly unfair, although at one point we almost lost out of the blue due to a bad event, which made us realise that planning on going up to 4 out of 4 lands in itself is already pretty dangerous. So yeah, massive thank you here, Tiny, with a really nice game breakdown here. I really enjoyed this one. So obviously Volcano, I've mentioned before, is one of my boys. And yeah, it's one of them, this idea of Board E. They actually mentioned specifically Board E here. And Board E has a mountain in land 2, which of course, if you're there against Scotland, it makes cleaning up those two coastal cities an absolute afterthought. But they also have a mountain, I think it's land 5, E5, which is right next door to it. It's adjacent to it, but it's much more central, and overall it's a much better land to start most of your games as Volcano on that board. It's actually probably your best board overall. But it's one of them where they're saying, God, I wish I had actually maybe started over in E2 and kind of erupted and cleaned up those cities early on. So you've got that kind of balancing act there of sort of where, as Volcano, you want to pick your starting land. And we talked about that in the Volcano playthrough. If I remember, I'll go ahead and link that up here, where we played Volcano and Brett into Brandenburg, Prussia on the previous one before this. And we obviously, as part of that video, talked about kind of starting presence placement and thinking about where to place your thing. But other one here that they mentioned, Flow Like Water, Reach Like Air, we're going to come back to that one later. Hold tight. Now, up next is Odin AG, and they say, I played against Scotland level 6 as Volcano on the board where land 2 is a mountain. I forgot that Odin said this. So yeah, I paired these together, obviously. So I placed my main Volcano in land 2 and obliterated the cities, and that's the only time I've managed to beat Scotland level 6. So yeah, honestly, it's an absolute afterthought. If you know Volcano, you know how much damage they can do into their origin land. If you get to start in that land, it just makes Scotland an absolute piece of cake. So if you're struggling against Scotland 6, if you're listening to this, go and pick Volcano, pick E-board, start in land 2, and it should be a cakewalk. So up next then, we're nearly there, guys. Fluffy Goblin says, I like Scotland. Level 6 is a bit weird though. I always feel that they go from being very coastal focused to free real estate in the inland. An extra town on those lands almost guarantees that the next time this land will be built, it will be a city. So every time we played Scotland 6, our coasts were more than well under control while we had to scramble for several problem lands in the inland. And I absolutely agree with this, Fluffy, 100%. Scotland have this knack where you think you're good and you think you've got the coast under control, and then you look and you realise, oh my god, the inland is an absolute hellhole. Aren't these supposed to be the coastal adversary? So you really do need to balance that. That is 100% a balancing act. I talked about it before. Their fingers are very much situated in those inland pies, and it's not a very tasty pie if that starts to get out of control. Nervanine then says, to be honest, I don't play much against adversaries, but I find Scotland pretty hard. So the fact it adds tons of coastal towns, it makes them your priorities so that they don't build cities. And often I realise that the inland is rather an afterthought. Okay, so they're saying that they actually do think the inland is an afterthought. I'm not sure there whether they were saying that becomes a problem later on. I think that's what they were getting at there. But they said, so far the best combo, I play double-handed, of spirits I found against this Scotland is Hostility Keeper and Darkness. So big shout out for Darkness here. Love this one. So Keeper gets rid of towns on his board while Darkness abducts them. So they say, I beat Scotland 3 and plan on trying higher levels. So Nervanine, if you're listening, that's super cool. I love the shout for Hostility Keeper this time. So somebody else mentioned Keeper. Now we've got a shout for Hostility Keeper. And I think Hostility is a brilliantly designed aspect for them. I think I've only played it once, maybe twice. And I loved it. I loved how different it makes Keeper. I love that it's relevant. I think it's a downgrade for sure. I think it is a downgrade in power on Keeper, but that's okay because I think Keeper's a little too powerful to begin with, and it's also not just a strict downgrade. It's texturally very different, and it gives you some upgrades as well as downgrades, so it kind of is a plus and minus effect there. But I could absolutely see Hostility Keeper being really, really good into Scotland. Obviously the wilds on the coast, excellent, but also hostility and all the damage it can do and all that, super good. And Darkness, I love the shout for breath here. And I think, unless I'm mistaken, I checked Red's matchup axis for Scotland, and I think he had Scotland rated not the best for breath. I think maybe around a B, something like that. Like, not awful, but not the best. And I looked at that and I wondered, that doesn't sound right to me. Exploring onto the coast with towns, for a lot of spirits is really tough, because it's, a town is harder than an explorer, but not for breath. Actually, for breath, an explorer and a town, as long as they're the single invader in a land, it's the same thing. They abduct it just as easily. So that alone seems like a really nice interaction. I think Brett getting around, Scotland don't flood the board with plastic, not early anyway. Even on the inland, like for the first couple turns, they're focused on the coast. They're not focused on the inland. They don't put extra buildings on the inland. So you are able to maybe get around during those early turns and pick off explorers and stop builds that way. So I feel, and of course Brett deals a million fear, so I feel like Brett should be really, really strong into Scotland. I was a bit surprised by that. I know they don't like the build-up thing, and if you get multiple cities, of course, in Land 2, I think Land 2 might be a little bit of a struggle, but they do have that card in their hand that says an abduct an invader, so that can get rid of a city, and then maybe your innate gets rid of the other city, so I can still see Brett finding ways around that. So struggling on that one to see how that's a B matchup. I think Brett is insanely strong, and I really think that Brett could do really good work into Scotland. So, moving on, Emmental 18, or Emmental 18. I just jumped to cheese. Oh God, that's terrible. What does that say about me? Maybe it's Emmental, or maybe it is Emmental. I'm not sure, but I love Emmental cheese, so that's where I went. But anyway, I got hard comboed yesterday by them. And the order of the invader deck went mountain, wetlands, Coastal, which is board D, which contains 2 wetlands, and then they went Wetlands X for a stage 3, and then Wetlands X for a stage 3. So that's counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive wetlands, every time exploring with a town because they were coastal, and building because there was an adjacent city. And they say, insert "I'm tired, boss" meme. Which I love, that "I'm tired, boss" meme. Yeah, that is, Emmental. That sounds pretty cheesy indeed. So, yeah. Okay. Moving on, we've got Inconsequentialis. I love that name. Is in multiplayer, Scotland is my least favourite adversary, primarily due to the escalation. So, in my experience, with 4+ players, whoever is going to take the escalation is going to have a bad time. So, okay, Inconsequentialis coming in, and they're saying that very different to most other people, it's their least favourite adversary. So they say some spirits can handle +4 towns on the board once, and we try to make it so the first escalation goes to the quote-unquote best target, but quite often taking the first escalation means you also take the second escalation, which is absolutely true. And very few spirits can handle 2 in a row. So they're saying one player is playing to stall and lose their board as slowly as possible. Then eventually somebody comes and clears their board for them. And they mention cast down into the briny deep being very efficient. That's one way to put it, all right. But they say, but also it's just a terrible, terrible player experience. And I hate being the person this happens to, and consequently, or rather maybe inconsequently, Alice, that didn't come off at all. I also hate doing it to anybody else. So I'm absolutely struggling here, folks. I'm trying to make jokes and I'm failing miserably. But again, this is the BlunderSpeaker Show. These are the blunders you have to know and love. So look, that's Inconsequentialis here. They're talking about multiple player games and it being one person who takes the hit on the terrible, terrible board, and how that's a really terrible player experience, which, you know, I see it. Again, here for me, I'm going to disagree. Not because I disagree with what they're saying, but my experience at least is that I mostly play this game solo, multi-handed. So I'll play 2, 3, 4, whatever number of spirits myself at home, not with other people. And for me, when I play against Scotland, of course, I'm just one person, so I don't have that sort of this is my board type experience. I think I've mentioned this on the show before, and I'll mention it again a lot. I really strongly believe that when you start a game, like, forget who's on whose board. It's not really a thing anymore for me. Yes, you'll of course have your presence sort of situated more so into a corner or a side of the island more than you would on the others, and that's natural. That's obvious. But I think you should be right from the off. You should be thinking about how to optimize all of your plays across the whole island, not just on your board. I think we talked about that in the action economy section from the previous episode. But so for me, at least, when I'm playing, I don't see the Scotland escalation as being, that's one bad experience for me, the one player. But clearly here I'm talking about multi-handed. So I do absolutely appreciate, and I said this I think in the Reddit thread, that I appreciate how if you're one person and your board is getting hammered, and especially if the team aren't being particularly strongly coordinating across the island, that could be a very bad experience. So I absolutely understand and I appreciate what's being said here. But for me, the solution to that, for me, there is a solution to that. The solution is you need to be getting across and you need to be working together. And if you do that, I think you're okay. If you're not doing that, clearly here you're going to get hammered and it will be a bad player experience. So I do understand that. So moving on then, again, we're almost there. Colerig, I think it's Colerig, but it's pronounced in an interesting way, says, I love them as an adversary, but feel their escalation is a little too rough over 4 players. Short and sweet, very simple, something I'm absolutely not capable of doing. Thank you, Colerig. Blacker Spork then, I think this is the second last comment, says, relentless gaze can destroy both cities in land 2 on the first turn. Oh yeah, baby! The first turn, that's amazing. So yeah, Relentless Gaze can do some crazy things. Shadows has an easy game. If land 2 comes up first or second, clearing it with the 3/4 to hand counterattack that we heard earlier in the in one of the other comments, and an almost impossible matchup otherwise. I love that. It's like, yeah, well, it's actually a really easy game if this one thing happens. Otherwise, can't possibly win. It's impossible. So that sounds a bit right for Shadows. Otherwise, they say here, Deep's Ocean causes discussions/arguments at the table as the coasts are expanded, which again, I'll get to in my game. They say also that the escalation is fun. Level 6 sometimes makes the inlands worse than the coast. The adjacency build ability is underrated. It hurts. And the satisfying adversary with a reduced mental load. So some really little snippets and tidbits there from Blacker Spork, and really agree with all of that. And finally, let's close it all out with Wowza Panzer, Chef's Kiss. And that's it, the whole comment. 2 words, short and sweet. So really amazing inputs there. Really, we went long on this one, guys. That was a long and robust section for all of that. A lot of our episode is concentrated, as I say, into that section here. So you've obviously heard me kind of comment around and talk around some of the stuff that's happening there. So massive thank you to everybody involved, as I say, and please do, of course, keep it coming into the future. So I'm going to stop, take a breath, pour myself more of this fancy nonsense. Got a bit of that left in the bottle. Let's get that in there. Elderflower and apple pressing. Absolutely, sir. Get myself another big splodge of sparkling water on top. Get that one going. Didn't bring any ice, unfortunately. I don't know about anybody else, but I find when you put ice in sparkling water, kind of kills it. Don't know what that is. Some science, there has to be some science involved there. But when you put sparkling water, when you pour it into the glass, you know about that kind of poppy, icy stuff. You know when the ice goes in a drink, it pops and the ice breaks and stuff like that. I feel like when it does that in a sparkling water just goes dead almost immediately. So I don't know what. I mean, there's some sort of chemistry involved there for sure. But I tend to not drink sparkling water with ice for that reason. Anybody wants to get in the comments and tell me why that is? More than happy to hear it. Anybody wants to get in the comments and tell me why sparkling water is the worst thing ever and I'm a menace to society for drinking it? Well, I'm also happy to hear that too. Okay, so that's the comments. It's done. Now we're into the adversary analysis, and as I say, I'm not going to go too robust and in depth because we've covered a lot of it already. I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of a breakdown on, again, what kind of Scotland do. Again, it's more a summary. We've just heard it, so I'll really summarize quite simply and succinctly if I can. No promises, but I'll try to kind of capture the essence of what it is, what they do, how they hurt you. Then we're going to talk a little bit around some kind of strategies and tactics on sort of how to go about sort of combating that. And then what I did was I took the breakdown of all of the actions available to a player in a game from the last episode, and I've just fleshed them out just a little bit in terms of the texture of Scotland on top of them. So it's kind of 3 parts to this, and we'll go through all of that, and then we'll close out with the breakdown from the previous game. So moving on, let's start off here and let's look at sort of what Scotland do. Again, it's a summary here, right? We just heard this, but for me here, I've kind of got 6 things in terms of what Scotland do. So when we talked about Brandenburg Prussia, it was like 3. It was like really simple. Here it's a little bit more involved. They do more. They're more well-rounded, as we say. So for me, the hardest thing about Scotland 2, what they do and how they beat you, straight off the bat for me, up front and centre, we've heard it loads, it's land 2. That's number 1. Land 2 is how they hurt you. Somebody said it, if you get rid of your land 2 and you clear that out early, it's a huge deal. It makes so much of the rest of your game so much easier. Obviously, they're not attacking you with the 2 cities, right? So they're not doing that kind of blight plus extra blight in the ocean, so it massively reduces the impact of that. I think we said it already, it reduces the adjacent cities, it makes it much less likely that your coastal lands will now have an adjacent city. And I say much less likely. Scotland love building cities. They put them all over the board, so they absolutely do build them. And this is not going to be, it's not a one and done, right? You don't just clear the land too and you never have to worry about that adjacency build again. You definitely have to worry about it. But obviously clearing land too early makes that a lot easier. And just generally speaking, like it's a knock-on effect type of a thing with Scotland, right? Scotland are not a rush tactics, tempo, early sort of early action economy style of adversary. We've talked about that in the previous adversaries where we talked about Sweden, France, and Brandenburg Prussia. That's where all of your kind of early game, your early tempo, all of that is situated in those type of games. Scotland is very much the reverse of things, and it's a nickel and dime kind of situation here with them. So the land 2, getting rid of that early, it creates all of these kind of knock-on effects that add up throughout the game, and it really does, as I say, a lot of it stems back to that one single land that they make on the board. So that's their main thing. Very second place is kind of, it's very clearly related here, and it's the coastal lands. Generally, the coastal team, how they attack you on the coast is the second thing that they do that makes them really, really tough. And this, of course, is going beyond the level 2 here, or the land 2, should I say. It's a bit more, generally speaking, all of the lands. And here we're talking about, obviously, the rules, like exploring with towns, the blight situation, all of that kind of stuff is sort of consolidated within the coast. And it's a very close second place here. If you got rid of that kind of land 2 situation and you slightly changed the rules, but you kept all the other coastal stuff, they'd still be super hard, clearly here, right? So that's the case with that one. After that then, and again, this is really close in third place here because this is causing you so many problems as well. It's the runner. It's the back-to-back. A lot like Brandenburg Prussia. If you hit a back-to-back, and we talked about it earlier, getting that stage 3 card up closer to the front of the deck is giving you many more opportunities for what somebody just talked about in the previous comment, the wetlands. Like doing that kind of just runner. It hurts. And especially if they're coastal, that is going to hurt so bad. And even when they're not coastal, when they're inland, it's arguably even worse because they've got the runner situation. And let me talk about that now. We haven't really talked about it yet as far as this episode is concerned. I'll bring it up now. Then one of the hardest things that Scotland can do against you is nothing to do with the coast. If you think about a runner with Scotland and you think about the inland now, so forget your coastal situation where they keep building towns and they keep attacking you and they keep adding extra blight. Ignore all of that and let's talk about those inland lands that we've been ignoring for the whole game. What's happening there? Well, think about it. If you've got a card ravaging in an inland wetland, for example, let's say it ravages. Let's say we clear the ravage. We defend. We counter-attack with it at hand, and it's cleared. The land's empty. Now I'm going to Scotland 6 into that land, and I'm going to place a town in there. Can't stop it. You know, your paralyzing frights and your year perfect stillnesses of the world, your infestation of venomous spiders, none of that is going to stop this. They skip invader actions. This is an adversary action and it doesn't get skipped by that. So you're going to add in there. And again, also, this isn't a build. It's not getting stopped by disease. It's not getting stopped by explorers, wilds, should I say. The only thing that can stop this the Scotland 6 ability is removing the adjacency. So if you remember when we said at the start, the way this ability is worded is the land needs to be within range 1 of a building. So if you can stop it being within range 1 of a building, i.e. isolate the land, you actually do get to stop this ability. But if you don't stop the ability. So if you're within range 1, and by the way, within range 1 will count the land you're in. So if you've nothing adjacent, but you have a town or a building in the land, then that counts. So do bear in mind and do watch out for that one. But yeah, let's just finish out the point I was making. You're now gonna place a town in there after the ravage, and if you've hit a runner, you're immediately building a city right off the back of the Ravage. You're going, build a city, and then it's like the land was empty 5 seconds ago, and now it's got a town and a city, and that hurts so bad. That is absolutely brutal, because it's so different to everything else that you're doing throughout the whole game. Like all of that land too that I talked about, and the coastal stuff, and all the nightmare that you're having to deal with all over there. You heard many other commenters pointed out that you sort of forget, or you know, not forget, but you don't have the actions maybe to dedicate to the inland, and then this happens and it hurts so bad, and it stings, and it ravages. And then if you hit another back-to-back, and you hit wetlands, and every time it's just bam, no, you didn't stop it, okay, here's another town, here's another city. It's brutal. And in the playthrough that I did, in the other thing, I had multiple inland lands that were full of buildings. There was like 2 or 3 across the game that were absolutely piled full of buildings, and it's pretty much all because of the runner. So that's very much in a very close third place to the other 2 things. I have sort of actually, well, I've talked about it already, because I had number 4 here I called Inland, which is, for me, the runner is really, you know, is where the damage is dealt on the inland lands. Now, inland itself, of course, it's still going to take that inland town, but if you don't hit the runner, it's just going to pile some stuff on the inland a bit, and yes, it's going to build up, and you're going to have lots of extra towns in there that you were sort of ignoring for a while, and then those lands explore, and then you've got a problem. But if it's not the back-to-back, if you haven't hit the runner, it's a lot more manageable, but still tough. Don't get me wrong. So they're your kind of first 4. Then I have a gap, and then you've got in 5th place, it's Blight. Now, of course, Blight is a lost condition. It always is in the game. And clearly here with Scotland, they just tweak the dial a bit, right? They just make that just a bit tougher. And they make you lose the Blight just a bit quicker than normal. So, you know, it's something to bear in mind. Your game will absolutely come down to Blight sometimes. But for the most part, if you're controlling the plastic, you're controlling the Blight. And if you're not controlling the plastic, of course you're not controlling the Blight, but you're kind of getting overrun at that point anyway. So it's a little bit of a cause and effect type situation going on here, where those first 4 things that I talked about with the coast and the runners and all that sort of stuff, if that gets out of hand and you can't control it, yes, you might lose the Blight anyway, but you were losing anyway, you know what I mean? So it's not like the extra Blight from Scotland is causing the lost condition as such there, right? What I'm talking about more here is those really tight, narrow games where you have mostly control of a game, but it just slightly gets away from you, and you lose the Blight. It does happen, right? So that's that. And then finally, last in 6th place is the actual lost condition itself from Scotland. I have this way back. It's behind Blight. It's somewhere around the Blight. In 5th and 6th are pretty close, but they're both way behind the first 4. Yes, there will be games where you're under pressure as a result of the lost condition. They're few and far between, as far as I'm concerned. You heard a couple of commenters mention that it's a very fair lost condition. I would go as far as to say it's a very easy lost condition. I think if I'm thinking on the spot right now, I'd be pretty sure that it is the easiest of all the lost conditions, and I think I'd say that by a pretty big distance as well. Trying to think right now. France one sucks. HME is problematic. England is problematic. Actually, Russia is also generally fairly easy or manageable. But it can get you. The Russian one can get you. Again, that's for another day. But for me, the Scotland one can't really get you. If you know what I mean. It doesn't quite come up. You know, you're usually focusing enough of your attention on the coast that you have to be there. You have to be dealing with it. And again, a little bit like what I said about the Blight. Yes, the game can get away from you where they do get the 3rd city on the board. But if that was the case, you were kind of losing the game anyway. You were too far behind. There was too much plastic there anyway that you were probably not really going to recover this game. And you would either lose to the Blight or whatever. So that's that. That's what they do. We'll talk now a little bit, as I say, around sort of some strategies. I'm not digging into these in any great detail, and about as much detail as all that really detailed stuff I just talked about just a moment ago. But yeah, I've got kind of 7 things here. I'll just kind of try to touch on them briefly. Again, strategies here. How are we coping with Scotland? How are we dealing with what they do? number one, right up front and centre, because it was right up front and centre a second ago, it's right up front and centre here. It's shut off land 2. This is going to be your, remember again, we talked about this kind of this kind of very good to very bad kind of scale that we looked at before. This is your very good. This is shut off land 2, and as I talked about before, the knock-on effect will come. So that's I've spoken at length about that already. Next thing that you can do that's very good against Scotland, again, it's right up front there, and it's right up in terms of things that you can do to win the game against Scotland. It's still very good, and it's incremental value. So I talked about it, I think, already before, so I won't labour the point here, but this is a nickel and dime over the game, accruing, before we talked about 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s and all this kind of thing. You're not necessarily looking for them as much as you're just looking for 1.1-for-1s, 1.2-for-1s, just that bits of value over the whole game. This isn't an action economy game per se, not in the same way it is against Brandenburg-Prussia. Against Brandenburg-Prussia, the whole thing was action economy. You have to match them on action economy in those first 2-3 turns, and if you do, you're safe and dry. You have inevitability over Brandenburg-Prussia, provided you match their action economy early. Scotland is not quite the same thing. This isn't the game of tempo. It's not a game of getting out there and just absolutely exploding in the first 3 turns, and as long as you do that, you're good to go. Against Scotland, you're much more thinking about the long game. You're much more thinking about getting that value over the game and finding ways to extract that value. And it doesn't necessarily have to be positive action economy, and that's an important point to mention here. In the game against that I played against Scotland, we'll get to it shortly, but I made a really big effort to focus on the land 2 early on the board of Bringer, because that explored on the first turn. So I had that, I was facing that down really, really early, and I talked through in the game about how I was willing to dedicate 2, 3, 4 actions, a bunch of actions to deal with that land, which I usually talk about not being a good idea. You're looking for that kind of one-to-one sort of relationship, but here it was like I'm dedicating like 4, maybe even 5 actions to clear that land and stop it being a problem, and that in itself will start to gain me those edges across the game. And that's the type of stuff we're talking about here. We're looking for long-term as opposed to short-term. So that's your incremental value. Next thing is well-rounded gameplay, and again, I've got this right up in very good as well here. Don't rely on one thing against Scotland. So if you've heard anything from all of the wonderful posts that we heard from everybody else, is they're really well balanced. They attack you from multiple angles. They do a bit of everything. They're not all in on one strategy. You can't counter them with one strategy, right? Every spirit is good. Every spirit has something to do. These are all true statements. But the thing here to focus on is you don't want to just focus and narrow your attention on one aspect of the gameplay against Scotland, or you will lose to the others. So whether that's focusing on the coast instead of the inland, focusing on blight removal because it's good at whatever, combating the blight situation, or focusing on stopping bills on the coast, and there's no real one avenue that you can shut Scotland down with. Like gaining loads of fear, yes, you need to gain fear, but you can't just rely on that, because you'll just get absolutely overrun by the plastic. So there's a whole bunch of things I could say here in this section, but generally speaking, what you should take away from here is find a way, either a spirit or a team or a card or an innate or whatever, or just a growth pattern that gives you well-roundedness in your game, so that you can try to overlay your bit of fear with a bit of damage, with a bit of whatever, or your defend with your Dahan, with your this, with your that, and you're trying to, or your major power spam, your reclaim loop on your rumbling earthquakes, but overlay that with a bit of blight removal, because you keep taking hits and then trying to hit them back. So just have enough blight removal just to survive long enough that your rumbling earthquakes will eventually win you the game. So it's having those kind of 2 to 3 different avenues to go with and fight Scotland on, and if you do that, you will beat them. Next thing then, we're still on very good here, because spirit support and growth, which for the first three the first three adversaries I talked about in this series, was generally in neutral at best. I think even one or two of them I had it in bad. But here now we're going from either bad or neutral. Over here we're going all the way up to very good, because spirit support and growth is exceptionally good against Scotland. So again, we talked about incremental value over the long game, but here we're really very much talking about how I grow my spirit, how I support my spirit, how we support each other, how we interact around the table. What are we doing now and what are we doing later, and how is that being mapped and planned across the game? Thinking about taking actions and taking sort of building strategies that are around growth and power and end game inevitability, not short-term investments that just provide their own inevitability. Scotland, you won't provide inevitability in Scotland unless you scale with them. So this is, again, earlier in the episode, we talked about, there was sort of some comments back and forth around, do they have staying power? Do they have ways to rebound? And are they robust and all that? And again, you know, people will have different opinions around this. But for me, the one thing here is Scotland aren't a quick game. That's one thing that's almost, sort of not within question here. Scotland have a ton of fear cards. They will place a bunch of plastic. You are going to have to kill a bunch of plastic. You're going to have to go to that long game with Scotland, no matter how you choose to do it, whether that's a fair victory or whether it's, as one commenter said, maybe it's a terror level 2 victory, or however you want to go about doing it, it'll take you a while. So you're going to have to go to that long game. And if you're not scaling into your long game, you're getting stuck in your short game, you're getting stuck in reclaim loops, you're not scaling up your innate, you're getting stuck at those sort of low and medium levels, etc., etc. Hopefully the point is made there, but that's the idea around your spirit growth. Aim for growth, aim for the long game. Next up is, so that they're your very goods. Then you've got kind of good, which is reactive play. So here's something again that I mentioned in the previous episodes where I said, be proactive. France, I think, is where we said that. Be proactive. Have a proactive plan of managing all of those little interactions. Little two explorers go over there, bam, gobble them up, stop them building. Be proactive. It's not quite the case with Scotland. You will certainly never hear me tell you don't be proactive in a game of Spirit Island, right? Because that is kind of Spirit Island 101. Somebody again mentioned in the comments about good basics, playing good Spirit Island, quote unquote. Good Spirit Island generally involves being proactive, thinking about what's coming next, being one step ahead of the invaders, right? So I'm absolutely not here to tell you right now to throw that in the bin and don't be proactive anymore, okay? That's not the case, right? But what I'm saying here is that it's also okay to sometimes be a bit more reactive in these slower types of adversaries. England, of course, is another, where you can kind of defer problems a little bit, push them a little bit down the line, just a little bit, defer that issue. I can't deal with it the right way now, so I'm not going to deal with it at all. Maybe that means taking a blight and an extra blight on the coast, because I can't deal with my land 2 properly. So if I can't deal with it properly, I'm not going to bother at all. And I'm going to wait, and I'm going to try find the right tool for the job. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Find the right tool to deal with the issue at hand. Sort of a little bit to my point about the well-rounded gameplay. Find the right ways to manage the game in front of you, right? And that means a lot of time this is related to drafting, right? So a lot of time that's what we're actually talking about here. It's waiting, seeing how the game is going. Did I hit my back-to-backs or did I not? This kind of thing. Like, where did they go to, and where are they about to go next? I've seen they've explored into those particular, our 1-1 and our 2-2. So we've done the 2-2. Now we're on the stage 3. So now we can think and we can go, okay, right, those 2 lands are gone. The next 2 lands are coming up here. You're kind of judging and you're going, right, I have a 50-50 in there. That's the land I want to maybe accept a risk on that one, but I maybe don't accept a risk on that one. Now I need to draft accordingly. And now I'm kind of being reactive. So again, that's the sort of idea of, okay, what am I missing? Do I have my defend power? Maybe I need to go and find my big hammer. I need to find that rumbling earthquakes. Let's dig. Let's kind of abandon everything because, I don't know, the game's maybe getting away from us too much and we can't, these little nickel and dime stuff that we're trying to do isn't quite working. We need a big hammer. I need a tsunami. I need a, Forest of Living Obsidian or something like that. So that's what I mean about being reactive there. That can work. That was still in good. We still have one more good. There's lots of good things against Scotland. That's what we said before. Pretty much everything is good against them. Here's one more. Isolate. So we talked about it already with the Scotland 6 rule. Shutting down the adjacencies for Scotland 6. Amazing. Isolate. Works really well if you can fit it in your kit. Isolate the coasts. Stop them building a town or stop them exploring a town in the coast. Works amazing. Adjacency builds, another rule in there for Scotland. Empty lands build as long as there's an adjacent city. Not anymore, there isn't. So if you can get an isolate against Scotland, you're absolutely singing. And as it happens, I have won total in almost 200 games now. I think I've played maybe 190 odd. I have won Terror level 1 victory in all of those games, and it was against Scotland 6, and it was with Downpour Drenches the World, which is the one of the absolute isolate kings, together with Finder of Paths Unseen, and that's a big part of how I managed to go about doing that. So strong recommendation for Downpour into Scotland. Finally, so we've had a bunch of very goods, we've had some goods, we heard about isolate being good. All the way on the other end of the spectrum, very bad, is isolation. So isolate good, isolation bad. We talked about it already. Do not leave your mate on his board, on his own in the corner, getting hammered with 3 escalations and 100 extra towns on his board, because that is not going to be good news. So help each other out, be supportive, get across, and aim for the long game with the support power and everybody growing together, and you will be flying. So that's all of that. I've actually, of course, because I was preparing and I know what's in my notes and I know what's in the sections, I was kind of taking a lot of what I'm about to say and almost weaving it into a lot of the previous section right now. So I have, as I say, a section right now which is around action analysis, but I've already said a lot of this, so again, I keep saying I'm going to try to go quite quickly through it. But look, again, hopefully you're along for the ride and you're enjoying the show. So hopefully you're sticking with me. This is now going to be the action analysis this time, and again, I'm going to go through all of the various actions that we heard in the BP episode. And now I'm just going to, again, sort of add some texture around each of these actions, whether it's good or bad, and why it's good, and maybe in some cases why it's bad, and how Scotland can kind of combat that. So we'll start out here, and we'll look at the invader actions, as I called them last time. This in this case is actions against invaders, should I say. So first up is defend. Absolutely excellent. One of the best things you can do against Scotland. It's highly efficient. It's reusable. So obviously, if you're defending on your coast, your land 2 especially, they're going to keep going back to your coast. So if you can set up situations on the coast where you've got that reusability across multiple turns to keep reusing the same Dahan for defend if they keep attacking you in there, or even sometimes, as I said, on the inland, if you've got that kind of inland situation where you're going back to back to back and they keep doing that town city, if you just keep getting the defend power in there and reusing that Dahan damage every time, it's amazing. So defend is super strong in Scotland. It's obviously highly efficient in terms of damage output if you've got your hand counters, and of course stopping the double blight on the coast is really, really good as well. Controlling invaders, on the other hand, not so good. So sure, sometimes it's okay. I mentioned sometimes, especially in the earlier game, you can pick off explorers on the inland, push an explorer out in the inland and stop a build. great. If you get it in there and you can time it right, that's okay. That kind of tempo play that we talked about before. If you pick one off, it's fine. But don't be making this a big part of your plan, because the inland will get flooded. That will stop being possible. And again, the Scotland 6 is kind of hammering you there. So I would not be trying to pocket against Scotland, despite the fact that a lot of their attention goes onto the coast. Don't be wasting your time pocketing on the inland. I think this is a horrible adversary to try and do it against. You've got your adjacency builds, which again makes control even on the coast not very good. Again, they're exploring with towns. They're not even exploring with explorers a lot of the time. So you've got a bunch of effects in the minor deck that say deal with explorers. Awful against Scotland again. And again, the fact that the Scotland 6 is that add the town and then build without even giving you a chance to react. So there's no chance to kind of try control that situation. So throw all that stuff out the window. For me, don't bother trying to control Scotland. That's kind of my own general approach with these. However, dealing damage or destroying plastic is absolutely excellent. So don't bother controlling them. Just let them go where they want to go, and then just destroy them where they are. So those big, like I mentioned, tsunami, rumbling earthquakes, there's a whole bunch of them, and there's loads of those big splashy 4, 5, 6, 7 fire and flood. Yeah, if you can afford it, god damn it, go nuts, get fire and flood in there. It's an amazing card. But yeah, that kind of big splashy, strong, powerful stuff, you'll have some time. As I say, it will go long. Get them into your kit and go ahead and just start smashing the lands and dealing like 12 damage or 8 damage or whatever the hell it is. You know, tsunami the coast, deal with 8 in one or whatever, and 4 in every other land. Go ahead and do it. It's going to be awesome. So do that. Remove, downgrade, or replace invaders. Less fond of this. I generally don't like this effect very much anyway. Call it the handways. Yeah, sure, it's a nice little minor. Is that what it's called? I think it's called Call it the handways. The one that replaces the town with the thing. Okay, but like you've got the major power that does it to vanish softly away as a major power. Don't be bothered with all that nonsense. It's it doesn't give you any fear. It's all a bit fiddly, and it requires a bit of setup. You have to combo that with another card and all this other kind of stuff. So I'm less in love with this. You've got the other one that costs 7 that removes everything from one land. The one from Nature Incarnate. I've never even cast the card because I think it's awful. It's cool thematically. It's the card, I think it's related to Fractured Days, where you kind of just undo and rewind the land or whatever. Fragments of Yesteryear, I think you call it. Cool card, awesome card. Don't be bothering against Scotland. Next thing is skip, prevent, or change invader actions. So skips are excellent, right? Of course they are. We talk about skips and we talk about defend being some of the strongest things you can do, especially as our adversaries start to get harder. Skipping becomes better. Skipping against Scotland isn't particularly great. I don't love it here. It's actually one of the adversaries I probably like it least. And that's not saying it's bad, but again, it's just probably least good out of all the rest. Skipping a coastal land to prevent a double blight isn't bad. Okay, it's okay. But what you're doing here is a lot of the time you're skipping a land and you're deferring the problem till later, which, as I said, can be okay in a managed situation. But if you're skipping coastal problems and leaving a city in there, that's one step closer to your loss condition, which you have to be bearing in mind. That if you're just going, skip that big massive ravage for 10, skip my land 2, it's okay, I'll come back to it in 4 turns time when it explores again. Okay, but that's, you're not getting rid of your cities, you know what I mean? So again, you've got this problem of kind of, how do I manage the plastic? How do I look to get rid of it? Versus how do I sort of defer the problem right now and deal with it later? So again, not saying don't do it, but just beware that can be a problem there. And the other thing, as I said, is with the Scotland 6, you can't actually skip that added town. So if you skip the land, if you get the back-to-back, you'll add the town, and then you could skip the build, so you won't get the city, but you haven't solved the land because next turn that's still going to ravage on you. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, next then we've got the kind of board management stuff. So that was more your invader management. Now you've got board management stuff here. So controlling or changing the behavior of the Han, it's great. As we said, defense is excellent. So finding the ways to get your Han around the board and do the work for you here is going to be really, really, really good. So don't be trying to optimize on the action economy stuff. Like I said before, this is where you're happy to invest multiple actions to get the Han plan across, get them doing your dirty work, and then reusing them and thinking about getting them around and using them for the next land. So that's really strong here against Scotland. Adding tokens then is a bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are really good. So here, wilds, we talked about already with Keeper and Tangles, really good. Stopping them exploring with those towns on the coast is great. Disease, again, it's pretty good. It's not excellent, but it's decent. Again, stopping those city builds on the coast can be change a whole game, because of course with your lost conditions, sometimes that's the whole thing. So disease can be excellent in spots, but as I say, in other spots, stopping a build on that runner inland land, or even stopping a build after they've explored with a town in the coastal land, they're still going to ravage with a town. So you haven't actually solved the land. So just something to be aware of there. Badlands are pretty good. Again, big damage majors, all that kind of stuff. So I'm a big fan of Badlands into Scotland. Strife is a mixed bag. Again, if you find the right moment for Strife, stopping the city attacking, and there's going to be plenty of them, it's great. But again, you've got multiple invaders there. I'm not the biggest lover of Strife in general. It's very good in the Strife spirits, of course, but just random oddball one-off Strife ads, you just need to be a little bit careful. They usually need to be combined with something else, which I don't love. I don't love 2 actions per land. We talked about that plenty before. Fire in the Sky and all that kind of stuff. It's a good card, don't get me wrong, but it's good because it gives you 2 fear. If all it did was add a single Strife, yeah, not so good. So anyway, that's that. And beasts as well, something to be aware of here. For beasts, again, Scotland just put too much plastic on the board. So your kind of beast kills, your beast damage, all that sort of stuff with your beast events. Don't rely too heavily on that kind of thing here. Isolating them, we talked about isolating. It's excellent. It does all sorts of really good stuff. So clearly here, isolating as a board management tool, really good. Move, add, destroy, or return destroyed presence, again, excellent. Here against other adversaries, not so good, but for me here, if you can add, if you can proliferate, it's the best thing you can be doing. But even doing stuff like kind of moving your presence around to get in the right spot to take advantage of that big major, or returning destroyed presence because it got killed later. I mean, returning destroyed presence is not a very good effect, generally speaking. But again, here with Scotland, you've got the time to take advantage of what that'll leverage you. Those little nickel and dime stuffs over time, if you can do them, they're usually good value. The add and remove and move blight I talked about already. It's pretty good. I like it here. I'm not a big fan of it in general. We said that before. But here against Scotland, I'm happy enough with it. A couple here and there, 1 or 2, maybe just to stop the blight card from flipping, or even maybe after it flips, just to keep you long enough, just keep you ticking over long enough to go and win the game with those big majors. I'm happy enough with it. I don't mind it here. And then add, remove, and change island tiles. So these are your big splashy effects, your briny deep, your dream of the untouched land, your weave together the fabric of place. We'll talk about that one again in the playthrough. All absolutely excellent here. Now, finally, last couple little bits here before we do get to the playthrough itself. The spirit interaction, I talked about it already being very, very good. Spirit support here is just excellent. Pretty much everything you can do in terms of spirit support. Your reclaims, giving each other reclaims like Gift of Constancy, giving each other energy, repeat, extra cards, giving each other elements, giving each other extra card plays, spur on with words of fire, increasing range, changing the speed of a card, sky stretches to shore, gift of twin days, all of these really good support cards. They're all absolutely excellent here. So pick them up, go nuts. You'll have time to reclaim them a couple times over the game and use them and eke value out of them. So they're all wonderful here. Strong recommend on all of them. And then finally the last little bit here around game progression, generating fear. It's excellent. You need fear. You have to have fear. You can't beat Scotland if you don't generate fear. So if you're playing one of those games where you're just trying to river, if you're just playing a river game or a finder game or something where you're just like tippy tappy, move things around and do a little bit here and there and a little bit here and there, you're never gonna get anywhere on that fear deck, and you're just gonna run out of time. be aware of that and try to layer fear in if you can, as part of that plan. And the very last thing here is the little oddball add, remove, and change cards in a deck. So there's not that many spirits that can do this. Obviously, we talked about Fractured Days being able to manipulate the event deck. Very powerful here. It's one of the matchups again where you've got that long-term value and you can start to really gain value from that effect. So it's really strong. With Fractured in particular, just be careful. They have the ability to move a card in the invader deck, but not if it's set up in a particular position. So I think the Ride and 8 is not allowed to move the coastal lands off to the bottom of the deck, but it can potentially move that. The stage 3 card, I think it can't do that either because that's positioned there. But what it can do is it can do the swapping the cards from the deck into. Why am I talking about Fractured Days? I'm just gonna give up right now. It can do all sorts of Fractured Days stuff. We'll talk about it when we do a deep dive on the Spirit at another stage. But do that cool stuff because it's really good. The other one, of course, is Bringer here, and we'll talk about what Bringer can do in terms of manipulating the fear cards, and that's super powerful. Do it if you can. It's an awesome ability. That's it. That's the breakdown. That's the analysis. We're 1 hour 56. Thank you if you've stuck with me. We are at the moment where we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown on the playthrough. Again, as always, it's not going to be a big long session. We'll talk for sort of 5-10 minutes around how the game went. And again, you don't need to have seen this. If you're one of my followers or you're somebody who's been listening through to the podcast but haven't gotten or been able to watch the episodes, hopefully you still can gain some enjoyment from this. And before, of course, we go through and we actually talk about the game and what happened in it, I do strongly recommend, if you're that way inclined, please do go and watch the video. I will link it up here in the top corner. So if you want to, go ahead and watch that one. And it is a strong recommendation from me. It's a long one. I think I said it at the top of the episode. It's almost 4 hours long, but there's some epic stuff going on in that. And if you've seen the thumbnail, I'm wearing a swimming hat in the thumbnail. So if nothing else, go and look at it and look at the thumbnail because I had a lot of fun making that one. But otherwise, for everybody else and for those of you who just coming back after watching the episode, we'll actually go ahead and we will announce that I won the game, which is great news. I was able to beat Scotland 6. There were, as there are every bloody time that I get to this, I've looked back and I of course have found a couple of issues. It is killing me that this keeps happening, but unfortunately that is just the way. I have no idea whether over all of the years of playing Spirit Island I have just always been making these bits and pieces of mistakes, which is probably somehow true or somewhat true, or whether it's just the fact that when I'm doing a playthrough being recorded that I just keep it's too much. It's cognitively just a bit too much of an overload and it means I'm slipping. I think it's a bit of that as well. So I think it's probably a little bit of A and a little bit of B here. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is there were a couple of things that mishaps in the game that I'll just point out now that are a little bit funny. I already mentioned one, which is the opening Explorer. So I did open with the Town Explorers as opposed to the Explorer. So that made the game a little bit harder on me. There was a couple of times on the first turn which one of the commenters in the channel pointed out, and I don't know how I managed to do this, but on the first turn of the game with Bringer, not once but twice I had opportunities to push a town into the ocean and I just forgot, which is absolutely criminal. I was watching back and going, what the hell, how have I missed that? So of course here, Bringer and Ocean, it's peanut butter and jelly. It's the perfect combo of Bringer does the fear push and then pushes the thing into the drink, and it's the combo. And I somehow inexplicably missed it twice on the first turn. So that was obviously so stupid and so highly frustrating to watch. That made the game harder on myself, of course. And it's not like I didn't know, because in the same turn, on the third action that I did in turn one, I actually do go ahead ahead and do the push with the shadow damage, and I pushed another town into the ocean. So it's not like I didn't know. I do it like 1 minute later. It was inexplicable. It's awful, but it happened. But anyway, those are two of just kind of little funny little things. The other thing that I did, which was super annoying because it actually had a pretty strong bearing on the game, was the first escalation I do. For the escalation when I hit that 1-1-2, so it's the first two. I resolve it on 2 boards instead of 1. Which again, like bread and butter, so basic. I do it and I place 1 town, and then you see me just stop and think for a second, and then I just go, okay, so on the other board, and then I place one on the other board, and that is just thinking of too many things at once. And it's not like I didn't know, because for the rest of the game I resolved the effect properly. It was just in that particular moment I resolved it like an event or something, because most of the time with events it'd be like on each board, or a fear card or something on each board. A lot of the effects in the game will be on each board, as we said before. So just in this particular moment I had a brain slip, and I followed it throughout the whole game, and it would have impacted several turns. There was like I followed and I showed, this wouldn't have done this, it would have done this instead, and I kind of tracked it across the whole game. So again, if you watch the playthrough, hopefully that didn't impact too much on your viewing, and hopefully you were happy enough to sort of see sort of the effects of that. But ultimately, overall, the end result is it wouldn't have affected the game. There was a bit of plus and minus stuff going on throughout, but the end result was not affected, because I got a wonderful terror level 4, or what's otherwise known as a fear victory, which was awesome. And the end of the game was so sweet. It was so cool. So we'll talk about a little bit about how that came together here. So on the bringer side then, how did they interact here in the game? First of all, I mentioned already, I think about 10 minutes ago, that stage 2 explored on their board. First explore hit their board with that land 2, not stage 2, land 2, which was the sands there. And you saw me really think through, and I sort of vocalized about how I was happy enough to go and dedicate all the actions needed to stop this land now. I could have let it go. It would have been very easy to say, you know what, I can't solve that with 1 or 2 even actions, so I'm just leaving it alone. But again, it's that knock-on effect stuff over the course of the game. How is this going to impact my game? And I decided on the spot I was going to dedicate what was needed to deal with it, and I did deal with it. And the knock-on effects were very clear to see. If you go back and watch the playthrough, all the action and all the problems were on Ocean side of the board, not on Bringer side of the board. And that shouldn't be true when you talk about Ocean and how strong Ocean is in their coasts. All of their deeps actions were more or less dedicated on that side of the board. Like all of their drowning, like most of what was happening was being dedicated to the Ocean side instead of the Bringer side. And that for me was in large part due to the fact that I had cleared out that land too. So that was super cool. What else do we see? Enticing and Lulling Dreams, which is the new innate for Bringer for the enticing aspect, is insane. It's insane. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this, if you have not yet experienced how good Enticing Bringer is, it is legitimately extremely strong. This is absolutely, for me, an A-tier spirit. It's 2 full levels of a jump from the base from the base spirit. I adore Enticing Bringer. I think that new innate is broken good. It defends as big a land as you can get. It defends a massive land. It starts pulling its gather, so it pulls stuff from multiple lands so you can solve. It does that effect of the lure the deep wilderness, the softly beckon ever inward thing, where you pull stuff from like three lands or whatever. It's super strong. I absolutely adore it. So strong, massively strong recommendation for me to go and play Enticing Bringer. It's just a joy. And you still get to keep the left innate, which is the Spirits May Yet Dream innate. Oh my god, I love this innate. It's such a joy to resolve that ability to look at the fear cards. It's a very, very rare ability in this game. There's only one other ability that I'm aware of that lets you do it, which is Shifting Memory has Study the Invader's Fears, which is another way to do this. And it's just every turn, you just do it every turn, and you look at so many fear cards in the fear deck, and you get so much value. So that thing I talked about before with Scotland, the incremental value over the game, over the game, over the game, this was just tick, 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 tick. It was just kept the whole game ticking over. Everything I was doing was built around those fear cards. And it's always true when I play with Bringer. Even the stage 1, like we talked with Scotland, it's just 1, 1, 1, 1 forever. Doesn't even matter. If you see them a turn, 2 turns in advance, you can plan for them and they still do good work. And it's just a joy. Keeping that left in 8 for me is why I way prefer enticing Bringer over violence. I think violence is very good. I think it's very strong, but I way prefer enticing, like, by a mile. Because obviously violence, then you swap. I think violence, then you get rid of the Spirit's Mayat Dream and you get to keep the Night Terrors, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, night and day for me. I just love that. So okay, what else? They had Weave Together the Fabric of Place. Is just a brilliant card. It's a very good, strong card. It's not overpowered on the surface. At face value, it seems a bit underwhelming. It seems a bit maybe abstract. What am I going to do with this? This is a little bit strange. And then you play the card and then you just always find uses for it. It's one of my favorite majors in the game. It's just wonderful. It's a brilliant card to play with. You find so many fun, unique interactions. Later in the game, throughout the game, I used it to drown. I weaved a land, a coastal land, essentially, after Ocean had come in across the board. I picked one of the lands that was next to the new sunk ocean and I weaved it, and then the interaction is at the end of the turn, all of what's in there gets pulled into the drink and you drown all of it. And it was 1 million invaders in that land, and Ocean got all of the energy from that, and it got to fund the big majors push for Ocean, which was amazing. So, but it did other really cool things as well. It was just I literally just reclaimed that card. I played it like every turn for the whole game after like turn 2 or something. And I'm not the biggest fan of reclaim loops in general. Don't love them as much because I find they're sometimes maybe a little bit repetitive, and I don't want to be too repetitive usually when I'm playing this game. But when you're weaving, you're doing lots of cool, interesting things. It's not the same thing as reclaim Vigor, the Breaking Dawn. Okay, wipe my board. Okay, do it again. Okay, do it again. Weave is a very interesting and fun one to reclaim loop with. So I had an absolute ball with that. And then finally, the other thing Bringer did was it got draw towards a Consuming Void. So it's later in the game you hear me just say like, I'm going to look for a hammer of a major or look for a nuke, and it was like the very first card off the top of the major deck, draw towards a Consuming Void. I played it in one of the lands, one of the other massively built up lands, and nuked the whole thing, did the kind of repeat effect on it, did it a second time, and it just gave me like 5 fear cards or something. It was amazing. It was a massive push at the end all the way through, and it got me through to the to the fear victory, or it got me about 4 fear shy from the fear victory. And we'll talk about what got me the last couple of points of fear now in just a moment. That was Bringer's game. What a joy. I love this spirit so much, as I said. I'm so happy I got to have it on the channel. I had to play the enticing. I know in the poll last time I said it was going to be base Bringer, but I couldn't do that to my man. Bringer, I love him too much, and I love enticing too much, so I'm really happy with that. Ocean. Last thing then before we kind of close out here. What did Ocean do? I talked before the game about how I'm not a huge lover of Ocean's Hungry Grasp, and I'm not going to sort of go through all of that all again here, but Ocean, its growth, its tracks, its tides, all of that stuff is, I find, very hard to manage. I'm going to call it clunky, and I don't know, it's maybe not fair because maybe I'm just not good with this spirit. I'm absolutely willing for that to be the case here, but it feels like every time I play them, I'm just like sort of tripping over myself, and I'm always just slightly not in the right place, or I'm slightly short on energy, I'm slightly short on this and that, and it just never seems to come together in a very clear and coherent way for me. And that's not usually the case with most spirits. I find usually I'm very, as you know, very sort of methodical and thinky about things. And because I play on my own at home, I'm usually happy enough to sit for an hour on turn 1 and really figure out my plan and figure out how to build a spirit. approach it. And I always feel like when I'm playing with Ocean, it's like, okay, and I think for ages and then I do the thing, and then it's like I get to the slow phase and like I try to resolve my pair and I'm like, god damn it, I'm just in the wrong place, like what, and again, that's probably an Ocean problem, not a me problem. But I'm happy to at least report that in this game, despite still doing a lot of that same clunky tripping over myself stuff, I still enjoyed this a lot more. I didn't find it nearly as frustrating as I often do. I think Deeps played a big part in that. It's my only second time playing Deeps, and I really do think I enjoy this quite a bit more than base Ocean. I don't think I have this nailed down at all. My build, I started out across the top track and I picked up the two elements that are at the start of the top track on top, which were quite nice in the game. I was happy enough with them. I think they did pretty good work. And then I went along the bottom track. So I was able to have just enough money and fun, just enough with my drowning, so that I didn't really need to fully go down that top track. Sidebar on that is I think that's a bit of a problem with the design of Ocean, in all honesty. I think Ocean doesn't really have or need a top track, which I find a bit problematic. I don't really like when spirits are like that. I think Ocean's a bit too strong on its energy gain, and despite the fact that Deeps generally does weaken that aspect of Ocean, it's still happened in this game, and it's still funded all of its plays through that drowning stuff. So anyway, that's enough on that. But the growths and the tracks and how I managed my tides and the Deeps in 8, I kept being in the wrong place, and it was kind of funny and kind of fun, in all honesty, to get that kind of frustration of, oh god, I meant to be in there and I meant to do that. So hard for me, and it was slow because, again, that kind of cognitive function of managing everything and also trying to think through this, I just kept getting it wrong. But anyway, again, not a problem. I had a lot of fun with it. Last two things then to mention about Ocean were two key cards. One was Flow Like Water, Reach Like Air. So somebody earlier on in the episode mentioned it, and I found that card as well with Ocean, and it is absolutely insane. It is completely beyond broken. I think the guys on the Spirited Discussion podcast, they did their Ocean episode, which quite inspired me to get Ocean as part of the playthrough here, and I'm very happy that they did. I don't remember whether they mentioned Flow Like Water, Reach Like Air. They may have, but oh my god, it's broken on Ocean. You just get to just drop the thing in and pull in 2 towns, 2 cities straight in the drink, generate 1 million energy, fear, all that kind of good news. So it was super broken. I did it twice in the game, and it completely turned the tide of the game. Excuse the pun. Absolutely intended, but it was wonderful. And the very last thing then that Ocean did, which closed out the entire game, I mentioned already the big fear push that Bringer did. It left 4 fear at the very end of the game, and that was for a super thematic, super wonderful end to the game of a tsunami from Ocean, and it was using the Flow Like Water +2 range, so it was like ranging across the whole map from one island tile all the way to the other. And I had also encroached a bit onto that earlier on in the game, so I had created extra coastal lands, so I was doing all sorts of nuking. It was dealing loads of damage. It blew up one land and it killed like a whole bunch of extra towns and all sorts of really good news. So massively awesome and fun way to end the game. I had an absolute blast. As I say, I've just explained everything that happened, but it's so worth the watch. It was just such a cool way to end the game, and as I say, massive thank you to everybody who was along for the ride. So that's it. We're 2 minutes 13. We're done now. Usually at the end of the episode, I would now go ahead and talk about what's coming up next, and I would, of course, up until recently have been breaking down adversaries on what's coming next on the Adversary Series, but we're now going to do something slightly different. We're going to mix it up. I am going away next week, so I'm on a vacation or doing a little trip with my family next week, which means that my sort of recording and editing schedule and all that is a bit impacted now. I'm trying to get an episode ready to go up so that I'm working on it this week, so it's ready for the following week, but that impacts a little bit on my ability to get my kind of the poll and sort of getting people to input and all the other good stuff that I've been doing with the poll and input so far. So I'm putting that aside for now, and I'm actually putting the Adversary Series aside just for a very short time. So we've done 4. We were halfway. Really happy with that. That's Scotland in the books now, and I'm going to stop and I'm going to break things up just a little bit to give a little bit of breathe life into things a little bit differently, and take a little bit of a break from the adversary breakdowns, and I'm going to do something a little bit special. I'm celebrating as well a couple of little small milestones. I call them small, but I'm happy to call these milestones. I have massive thank you to everybody who's been subscribing to the channel. I'm now over 200 subscribers to the channel, which is small ball in terms of the Mr. Beast side of YouTube, but for me, I'm very, very happy with it. So again, huge thank you to everybody for being one of those 200 plus. Hopefully now by the end of this episode, and if you're listening, please hit that subscribe button. Hopefully there'll be a couple more by the time this is reaching your ears. I've had over 4,500 views. I've had, I think, over 850 hours of watch time. So again, I'm only getting the channel started. I'm getting it off the ground, but it's been amazing to be able to do this, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So thank you all to contributing to those things. So I'm going to take a little bit of a celebratory game and a celebratory sort of related episode here, and I'm going to do something a little bit special and quite fun and celebratory for me. So that's a surprise. I'm going to leave that one hanging. I'm going to do my absolute best to get it launched for the Sunday, so there'll be no break in the schedule. Sunday is my launch day, so I'm going to do my best to get that out the following Sunday when I get back. So it's not impossible that we miss a week here, but I'm really going to try hard to make that not happen. So that is what's coming up next. We've reached the end of the episode. What are we now? We're 12:15, so we're 2 hours and 15 odd of an episode. So if you hung on with me till the very end, again, huge thank you for being here. Because we're not going on to another adversary next, I just invite something a little bit different this time in terms of comments here. I just talked about sort of milestones and sort of what we've gotten done up until now and things like that. So really strongly invite you here to again get involved and let me know what have you thought of everything on the channel so far, and really do invite you to get involved. Is there anything in particular that maybe you liked that you'd like to see more of, or certainly anything that you maybe didn't like or that you would like to see changed? I've had people comment on, for example, the color of the pieces on the playthrough, right? The actual presence pieces. As soon as I got that, I'm like, the color, it didn't work, and so I changed it, and I've gone with the kind of red and blue to have a better contrast and better visibility. So there's been multiple things that people have been commenting on. Somebody on the last episode commented on my on the audio, on my voice, how it was far too bassy, and they didn't pick up on that until they were in their car, and the bass in the car was like it totally just drowned everything out, and they couldn't really listen to it. So again, really happy to hear people coming in and telling me things that are wrong or that are right. More than happy to hear them. So I really do strongly encourage all of that. So that's it. And really again, thanks for being here, and until the next time, may your manifestations be always powerful and glorious. See you then.